again on short notice. You've been a great partner throughout this COVID issue. I will call the meeting to order, and I will ask one of you, if you'd be so kind as to make a motion to approve the agenda. Moved by Dave, seconded by Ralph. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Purpose of this meeting is to discuss a couple of items: a proposal from the Economic Recovery Task Force regarding Phase 2 of the Public Realm Project and water, and then a second report with respect to waterfront parking and boat launch access. Are there any disclosures of interest? Seeing none, if anything comes to mind while we're going through this process and these processes, please just bring it to my attention, and we can deal with it then. First report, I won't spend too much time speaking to this. We've got 3 members of council on the ERTF, the Economic Recovery Task Force, that have been participating with some of our key staff and have really put a lot of effort into this over the last few months. I think it's gone from being what was perceived maybe initially as maybe a part-time issue to a very much a full-time venture, certainly led by Councillor Eamon, Ted in the chair. And so with that in mind, Ted, I will ask you if you are the appropriate person to introduce this particular report.
Thank you very much, Mayor Clark. I would be the person to introduce this, and it's my pleasure on behalf of the Economic Recovery Task Force to introduce the report. I will do an overview, and then I will turn it over to Laura to speak to some of the details in the report. And of course, we'd be more than pleased to take questions. What started several weeks ago as an initiative to assist a sector of our downtown businesses to expand their footprint, and which council dealt with quite effectively at that time. And thank you, members of council, for doing that. We're beginning to see the impact of that in our downtown. Has evolved at the Economic Recovery Task Force into a focus really on how we use the urban realm in the downtown. Currently, about 80% of the public space in our downtown, that's our sidewalks, our parking spaces, our roads, about 80% of that is dedicated to the automobile. And what we're finding in the downtown that our businesses are constrained by the physical footprint of the buildings they're in, and if they in fact want to expand in order to better serve our customers, they need to do it onto public space, and we dealt with that to some degree last time. What we're also finding is that there's a hesitancy in our citizens to go into the downtown and return to shopping because of the physical separation challenges that come with the sidewalks being narrow and many of the shops being relatively small. And so there's need to provide for those folks who wish to do that, and we'd encourage everyone in our city to return to normal shopping to the degree they feel comfortable with it, to use some of the public space, public realm for that purpose. And finally, what we're recognizing more and more is that one of the things we have lost with the COVID-19 crisis is the socialization that people crave, returning to some semblance of normality in our downtown, strolling, cycling, visiting, browsing, shopping. All of these things are a part, will enable our citizens and our visitors to have some social experience. Of course, doing this, it needs to be done safely, because the thing that is most important is that we maintain the excellent record we've had in Orillia of containing the disease and preventing our citizens from acquiring it. But that only happens if we continue to practice social separation, practice hand washing, practice coughing into our sleeve, and more importantly, beginning to wear masks as we go out in the community. But at the same time, we recognize that many of our downtown merchants are desperately in need of support. So the Shop Local program has addressed that to some degree, but anything we can do as a community to encourage the downtown. And in the report, there was a paper that I pulled together, drafting much of it from the Canadian Urban Institute's focus on main streets and how important our downtowns are to communities like Orillia. We recognize that. We've seen it for many, many years, but it reinforces that it's the heart of our community. It's the heart of our economy. It certainly boxes above its weight class in terms of contribution, so it's important. So this summer, what we're proposing is that we experiment in the summer of 2020 with a reusing of the public realm for the purposes I stated earlier. So initially, we'd like to have council agree to close the downtown streets and open and allow us on Friday evenings from 4 until 11 or thereabouts to, in fact, allow businesses to expand into the street, allow the arts district to expand into the street, to create a Friday night experience for those in our community who want to cycle downtown as a family and maybe walk downtown and enjoy the weekends that certainly we've been experiencing now. Though we're asking for a closure for both Friday and Saturday night, and we're asking for a closure for the entire downtown, that's front Mississauga from Front to Albert and Peter from Mississauga to Colborne, what we're suggesting is we start small, that we not close everything the first Friday night. We experiment, we evolve, we allow this to grow and expand as the merchants and our citizens come to be comfortable and see a value in using the streets for those purposes. And as we can manage the crowds, if they do occur, and our visitors to our community, so that we don't put over pressure on our downtown. So there'll be an evolution. So starting next Friday, a week this Friday, we have garnered that 19 of the 24 food retailers in the downtown will in fact participate in opening patios on the street, which we believe will give us enough critical mass. The Arts District has indicated their willingness to expand into the street. We believe that will be enough, and that hopefully we can continue this every Friday night for several weeks to see how it goes, and as it expands, we'll expand within the context of the ask that we have in the motion that is before you. All of this does require some financial assistance to enable us to close the street and do the mechanical things that are necessary. We're even asking for some money to help animate that experience as the province allows us to do over the next period of time, and maybe some buskers and maybe a few other things to make the experience even more attractive. And what I do want to say before I turn it over to Laura is that the work that has gone on amongst staff and the Downtown Management Board, Orillia Management Board, has been outstanding. They have come together over the last week or so, spent many, many hours working through the details of this, and we're represented, all the departments are represented at the table today, having contributed to bringing into a single report the effort of our staff. And so I very much appreciate their having done that. And I will now ask Laura if you wouldn't mind taking us through the elements of the project and setting us up for questions from council.
Laura, if you're ready, and I see you by the switch of your microphone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think Councillor Eamon has provided a really great overview of the program. The only few things that I will add or perhaps emphasize is that we have built this motion so that we can phase this in as it's safe to do so. So you'll see that the motion is actually quite broad, but that we're looking at phasing this in. We want to make sure that we're monitoring the amount of people coming to the street before we start to activate the space. And again, that's all about keeping things safe and really supporting the businesses who are doing a really great job of encouraging their shoppers to wear masks and sanitize and social distance within their stores. I would say that in addition to so we're asking about $30,000, and that is for a range of items in order to implement this. These funds will be put towards signage and marketing for the road closure and to encourage people to come support local businesses and restaurants. It will also help provide some detour signage around the existing road closures in the downtown, just to help people navigate through the downtown as we close additional streets. And then we're also looking at perhaps some funding for animation of the street if that becomes something that we're able to do. We're also looking to add sanitation stations to the downtown core, and that's really just sanitizer stations, so that people can feel safe walking into stores and shopping and browsing. I will say that of that $30,000, the DOMB staff does believe that the board can probably offset some of those costs based on their budget. They, of course, have not budgeted for 9 street closures throughout the summer, and they have had to allocate funds that were previously set aside for a few street closures to support businesses during the COVID, the impacts of COVID. So they have already reallocated some of that budget. They will be meeting shortly, and they'll be discussing this request. So any funds that are offset by the Downtown Management Board would reduce the city's contribution. So we do anticipate that that is likely that they'll be able to support that. Moving forward, I would just commend the Downtown Management Board and businesses in the downtown core for all the feedback that they provided. This plan was really built based on the feedback of businesses, and we hope that the community will come down to downtown Orillia on Fridays and Saturdays, if this is approved, to support local businesses who support the community throughout the year. So I'm happy to answer any questions council may have. Thank you.
Well, thank you both, and to the whole ERTF, as I say, made up by 3 members of council, and Laura, you yourself, Michael, and Dan, and I'm sure JR by extension has been involved, and to Ron and Ted. Thank you. As I say, I'm sure to a person that this has become more of a laborious task than originally thought. And I know it's not over yet, but I just from my position as mayor, and I think on behalf of the EMC, because when we approached you, everybody was just thumbs up. And so thank you for your efforts on this. And indeed, Laura, I will now entertain questions or comments from this virtual chamber, starting with Dave and then Mason.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. I hope you'll indulge me here a little bit, Mayor and Council. This is a bit long-winded, especially for me, but I just jotted down some things and I want to just read it if I could. So I've heard many times over the years that the main street should be closed to vehicular traffic in the summer in order to create a pedestrian-friendly, open market kind of atmosphere. Examples are given of this being successfully done in many cities, not only in Canada, but around the world. I personally have experienced this firsthand, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. The atmosphere is incredible. Then we have the COVID-19 situation that came along, and the RTF was formed to try and help businesses stay afloat during these very challenging times. As a member of that task force, my first thought was, well, let's close the main street on weekends from Friday night through to Sunday and just see how it goes. However, I don't own a business in the downtown core and therefore should not be making that decision without consulting the people that do. So as has been explained after many discussions and hearing different concepts, the plan that's presented in this report became the best option. Throughout this, to me, one of the most important considerations is that the Downtown Management Board, who represents the downtown business owners, be listened to. Therefore, we should follow their recommendation. Now, I realize this may go too far for some people and not far enough for others, but I feel at this point it's the best compromise. We'll have to closely monitor the streets and see how things go, and make sure that there's sufficient space for people to keep the personal distancing and be safe. And I think really the key here is we want people to know that it's completely safe for them to shop and dine in Orillia. So this may not be the perfect solution. And as I said, we'll monitor it and we'll make adjustments as needed. But I really think it's the ideal starting point. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that, David. And true to my normal form, if we'll keep it informal, if that's okay. If I need a justification for that, I'll blame it on the summer and the heat. I'm not sure why that's relevant. And Mason, you've been very patient. Yeah, your microphone's green, Mason, but we're having an issue again for some reason. Marcia is, oh, I saw Marcia's microphone come on there.
Yeah. Mason, I think you're having internet issues again. Something's going on.
Marcia, is there a test to know whether that is it, and whether there's a way for me as chair to know when to go back to him if the situation resolves itself through a stronger signal?
I will work with him, Mayor Clark, and I will send a chat to Megan and let her know when he's ready to go.
Okay, great. Mason, I will come back to you the moment I get the other green light. Further questions, comments? Robert.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Clark. I just have a couple of questions about parking lot access. For example, the parking lot across from Brewery Bay. Will residents and visitors be able to access that parking lot from Coldwater Road the opposite way? And my other question is, will Matchedash Street be open before we start closing on July the 10th, on the Friday evening? I think it's imperative that at least the construction project, they push their fence back so that there's both north and south access to that street.
Is anybody, Laura, I'm guessing, or Andrew? Sorry, that's first of all, we'll deal with the parking lot issue. I don't know who wants to jump in on that. I'll do that by hand in the air or a green light popping on. Laura, go ahead, thank you.
So I can speak to the parking lot access. It's not contemplated that that vehicular traffic will be accessing Lot 5 during the street closures. Again, that's just between 4 and 11 or 4 and midnight on Friday and Saturday evenings. We have anticipated that we may use this space for additional animation of the street if it's safe to do so. And I'll perhaps turn it over to someone else to answer the question about Matchedash Street.
Sure, and with respect to Matchedash, is there anybody on this particular call that can answer that question? Ralph? And I'll go to Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As part of the committee, I did a little bit of research and went downtown. And if we take out the parking on Matchedash Street, because right now the vehicles that are working on the apartment building there are using it for parking. If we take out the parking, Rob is absolutely right. That street can be both ways, north and south. So one of the things is no parking on Matchedash, and you can use it both ways. It works extremely well.
Thanks for that, Andrew. If you just give us an indication of what the Matchedash Street parking or driving situation is, that'd be great.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. For this report, we didn't actually anticipate making any changes to Matchedash, so we'd certainly have to work with the contractor to make changes if that is council's wish. But currently, we hadn't looked at changing that access as of now.
Thank you. Ted?
Thank you, Mayor Clark. Through you to staff. I see that they were curbing Front Street on between Mississauga and Colborne late last week. What is the time frame contemplated to put the first level of asphalt on that and allow that street to be that part of Front Street to be used? Because I do know that the challenge we have on Matchadash is the developer rushing to complete that facility this summer, and as you can see, is using that lane every day. The other thing to remember is we're talking about only Friday evening from 4 to 11, so that typically he's not that street's open. I mean, they're not constructing after 5 o'clock, so I think we've got a reasonable chance there.
I'll go to Robin and Jay in a second. But Dave, I think you mentioned, just for clarity, Friday and Saturday, and Ted just mentioned Friday. Just a little clarity for our viewing audience. Ted.
Go ahead, Dave.
Okay, so the idea is, as Ted mentioned, is to start on the Friday nights. And as I said, we're going to monitor things. And if there's a great response, then we'll expand it into Saturday nights as well. So that's what's suggested in the report.
Indeed, and thank you for that. Okay, Robin and Jay.
Just another follow-up question, Mayor Clark. In the report, it asks that the DOMB has a request for $5,300 from the monies that was allocated for their staffing to take down and remove some of the barriers. During the DOMB meetings, we've had to move a lot of money around from certain accounts to kind of offset advertising and moving money here and there. Is that possible that the DOMB get compensated for the $5,300?
I think I could answer that, but I think I'd rather have somebody more familiar with that. So Laura, if you don't mind.
So through you, Mr. Chair, the Downtown Management Board, when reviewing and deciding upon the support of a road closure, advised that they would be in support. However, they don't have the funding to do so, as you said, Councillor Kloostra. So at this point, we're contemplating that they have requested that the city pay for the staff for this purpose. So essentially, those DOMB staff would go out, set up signage and barricades, take them down. There also has to be someone on site to make sure that the fire route is clear and that if there's any issues, they're taken care of promptly. We did evaluate if city staff could do that. That wasn't unfortunately an option just based on the current allocation of staff. So that's what we're asking for in this report, is for the city to support those funds. DOMB staff believe that the board may be supportive of, as you mentioned, reallocating funds to support some of the other elements of this program. So for example, there may be funds to support the rental of road closed signage. There may be funds to support marketing because that's already contemplated in the Downtown Management Board budget, but the staffing itself was not contemplated.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Jay. Yeah, Jay, for whatever reason, we can't hear you as well. Not sure. You guys don't live together, do you? This is too bad. And I just asked Megan for an update on your situation, Mason, to hopefully get you back in the conversation. Jay, I see your microphone was on. Well, now it's doing something completely different. Do you want to try now, Jay? Jay, can you say something?
Hello? Hello? Hello?
Okay, go.
Can you hear me?
Yep, you're good. Go ahead, Jay.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know what's going on. I just wanted to start by saying I'm really sorry to the rest of council, as I must be on COVID time here a little late this morning. Not to mention that my fashion is slowly improving as this pandemic progresses. I did want to start by saying I really do appreciate the work of my fellow council members and staff. On this one, I'm going to vote against this proposal. The reasons were I was concerned. I know there is the opportunity for this to be changed later on, but the two reasons were, one, I thought doing it on a Friday or sorry, doing it on a Saturday or even a Friday night, I thought although it's not the purpose, it would essentially create an event that people would be drawn to the street at this time because it's open as a walking street. And also, I think there still needs to be some car access. I am in favor of opening up Mississauga a bit more to allow for more walkability and expanding, allowing stores to expand in. But I think there still needs to be a driving portion to this so that people can access each of these stores accordingly. The other thing, the one thought I had was, as opposed to closing off Mississauga, closing off the small little art section of just Peter Street there, and that at least would allow for some kind of central area. But I think my position on this was, if you're going to do it, it has to be a thing that's either multiple days or around the clock, so it doesn't create an event type scenario. And it's something in any other situation, if we weren't in a pandemic right now, I'd be in full support of this 100%. It's just because of this this ongoing pandemic that my concern is that this wouldn't, the effect, it wouldn't be a good effect. Thanks.
Thanks very much for that, Jay. I do understand that the report deals with the safety aspect as part of the rationale for this initiative. Laura or Ted, are you able to speak to that, or Jay's concerns about it being an event and maybe potential safety issues? Laura?
So, thank you. I would say that one of the main discussions, and I think Councillor Fallis does bring up a good point, there was a lot of discussion about how we do a street closure and balance what people are used to in terms of seeing flags and buskers and crowds and performances with, this is a street closure purely to allow some of those businesses to expand into the public realm. So we have discussed that with the Stay Safe Shop local team in terms of how we communicate that and market that. I will say that there are some businesses who simply cannot, their operations are very restricted unless they move out into the public realm due to their locations close to intersections. If there is vehicular traffic, it does introduce the need for barriers, etc. So I would suggest that that will be close. The safety of pedestrians will be closely monitored the first Friday evening. And if there are concerns, we've built this so that it's flexible so that we can address those concerns, perhaps reduce the amount of space that's open, look at what we can put in place to make sure that the next week is a safe event. But we have built this so that it's flexible specifically for the safety aspects that Councillor Fallis has mentioned.
Great, thank you. And on this particular issue, Ted, and then I'm going to go to Mason, because I believe we've got him hooked up, and then Ralph, and then Tim.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. It's been a real challenge for the task force to balance what's going on. We saw the experience in Peterborough where that community immediately after phase 2 was announced closed their main street and nobody showed up. And it was embarrassment for them and embarrassment for their merchants. On the other hand, we have the experience of Sauble Beach, where after phase 2 and the beach was open, they were inundated by way too many people and ended up closing the beach. So they're two extreme examples of communities that attempted to move forward in a manner that they felt was appropriate to assist their communities, and both of them were a failure. So what we've been trying to do at the task force is say, what can we do in Orillia that's an Orillia solution? And we were driven initially by the fact that our downtown is absolutely critical to the economic future of our city, as are all businesses, but the downtown is core. The downtown merchants have been suffering mightily. Many are challenged. We've been very fortunate that so far very few have gone out of business. But if this continues and the level at which enterprise is taking place in the downtown, we will see a significant number of downtown merchants close up their business. And if that happens, our downtown will be devastated for years to come. So we're trying to balance that, but we're also trying to balance it with the fact that our residents need to feel safe. And the only way our residents are going to feel safe if they're in the downtown is if there is space for them to move about. And that's why we're going for the closure of the streets in order to have that happen. So yes, there's no question that we're all concerned about our safety, but at the same time, I think we have to balance that with the economic realities of ensuring that we do everything we can in a safe manner to enable our downtown core businesses to succeed. And this is the model that we've come up with. It's modest in its attempt. It allows for us to expand it as our experience grows. It allows us to constrict it if our experiences were overwhelmed. We're starting on a Friday night because we believe Friday there are less visitors in the community than there are on a Saturday. We're starting on a Friday night because the downtown merchants, not just the food service merchants, but all of the merchants said they would probably, or a large percentage of them said that they would probably participate and keep their stores open later on a Friday night, which is a miracle if that happens in concert across the downtown. So there's going to be, we hope, enough critical mass of activity to attract people, but enough space for us to manage that and monitor it in a way that creates safety. Short of burying our heads in the sand and doing nothing, which was not what this task force was intended to do, but to recommend to our community ways and means of ensuring that we recover from this pandemic, not only healthy in a personal sense, but healthy in an economic sense. That's what we're trying to do here.
Thank you very much for all that were involved in that particular issue. Ralph.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to let Tim go first because he hasn't spoken and I have, and then Mason, and then I'll speak after, Mr. Mayor.
Ralph, if it's okay, I'll continue to chair the meeting. If
oh yeah,
go right ahead.
No,
that was
okay,
thank you. Very nice gesture, though.
Okay, thank you. I have some concerns on what Jay is saying. We've done this closing many times over the years, and it's been very successful. Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, it's a little bit different. So what Ted and what Dave is saying is absolutely correct. The merchant downtown is the heart of our community, and we have to do everything that's possible to make sure that it survives this epidemic. So I'm a little concerned that maybe, Mr. Mayor, in order to accommodate what Jay is saying, is maybe we should mandate that masks be worn in public places, or similar to what Toronto has done, and that kind of stuff. I know that's a different agenda, but I think maybe that's one of the ways that in the future that we can protect our citizens that are walking on the street. But we've done this many times. I have one concern about the $30,000 that I'd like to talk about after.
Okay, you can do that now, or I can come back to you.
Please come back to me.
Okay. Tim.
Sorry, Mayor Clark, don't want to chair the meeting, but I think Mason was next.
Oh, indeed. Sorry, and I even have an arrow with his name going up into the thing. Anyway, Mason, sorry. Looks like Marcia and you have figured out the bug in the system. So if you're no, apparently not. Okay.
Mayor Clark, he was working, but now his mouse has died.
Oh no. Okay.
We'll keep working on it.
You're not feeding or watering it? Okay. And please, if would like to get Mason in on this, if it's possible, Marcia, or just let us know, please. Thank you. So Tim, back to you.
Thanks, Mayor Clark. I've got about 4 little questions here, if I could. Mostly are just technicality stuff. First of all, I was wondering, what was the uptake on the first stage?
You want to relay all your questions and we can address them? I can just have the panel address them.
Okay, so I was wondering what the uptake on the first stage was. I was also wondering about music. In the report, it refers only to live music. I'm wondering, is recorded music allowed? And if it is, why? What is the difference between live and recorded? Not the complaints, but the concerns expressed to me over the last little while were from folks who were just a little bit concerned about the 4 o'clock closing. We're wondering if that could be moved back closer to 6. They rely on people actually driving up to their store. And lastly, what are the logistics of closing? If you are pulling into a parking place at 3:45, hop out of your car and disappear, what happens? And those are the 4 questions.
Great. Thanks very much for that, Tim. If phase 1 is going to be addressed, I will have to step away. Because I declared an interest in phase 1, but council deliberated. Laura or Ted, if you want to address that, but in the meantime, I will ask David to take the chair for a moment, and I'll come back in when it's appropriate.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Clark. Before I get to you, Ted, Mason, if your mouse is dead, hold down Control and Alt and hit the A key, and your mic will turn on, and you can turn it off the same way. Alt, Control, and the A key. Anyway, go ahead, Ted. Thank you.
I was going to direct the questions to Laura. I think she may have the specifics, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Over to you, Laura.
Okay, I'll start with the uptake on the first stage so that Mayor Clark can come back. I would say that we're pretty happy with the uptake on the first stage. A number of businesses throughout the city, I don't have the exact number, but there are a number of businesses throughout the city who have implemented patios. Not only have businesses who have never before had patios implemented those, businesses with existing patios have expanded. We do have a number of business owners in the downtown core specifically who have started to pursue the patio application. Some of them were waiting to see if fees would be waived, which is why they're a little bit late in terms of implementing those. We also have some who are working on getting barriers and meeting the safety precautions in order to implement those patios. But we should see quite a few pop up this week prior to the weekend, in addition to those that are already up throughout the city.
Thank you, Laura.
Okay, sorry,
Tim? Yep, go ahead.
You have a number on the downtown.
I don't want to provide an incorrect number, but I would say typically in past years, we've had about 3 to 4, and there's about 5 to 6 that I'm aware of in the downtown core so far, more that would open if the street closure was approved by council.
Thank you, Laura. You're good, Tim? Okay. And I think now that that's been addressed, that Mayor Clark can rejoin us. Thank you, Mayor Clark, and back to you.
Thanks, David. I appreciate that. Now, Tim had 3 other questions, basically live music versus recorded. Excuse me, would somebody like to comment on the merits of either of those and whether they were both contemplated? Laura?
Thank you. So I can't speak to the specifics of that policy, but I do know that both live music and recorded music are restricted at this time in terms of patios. I don't believe live music is permitted on patios at all. I believe that recorded music is permitted, but it must be at a low volume. So in terms of any animation of the street that we're looking at, even though it's not technically on a patio, we wouldn't want to contradict the intent of those provincial policies. Because when you have music, people tend to lean closer to hear each other, and that's when there's the potential for an exchange in contamination of the virus. In terms of animation, we're also looking at non-musical and non-sound related animation. So that could be buskers, that could be public art, the showing of vintage cars. We're exploring ways that we could introduce some animation without creating gathering spots that typically surround musicians or performers. So we are exploring various ways to achieve that. In terms of the third question about the 4 p.m. closing, the 4 p.m. closing is primarily, the timing itself is primarily because of the feedback from businesses. Retailers have advised that they're still getting a lot of shoppers and deliveries up until about 4 p.m. But restaurants in particular, if they're going to set up in the public realm, they're going to need time to get their tables and chairs out before the dinner rush. So the compromise there from the perspective of businesses, and is supported by the Downtown Management Board, is 4 p.m. Sorry, I will also note that in order to appease some of those retailers who have expressed concern about closing traffic, some of those marketing dollars would go towards the signage of curbside pickup locations, so that even during the road closure on Friday and Saturday evening, all the retailers that would have been accessed had it not been for the street closure will have a nearby curbside pickup location. And that has been supported by a number of the businesses we spoke to who still rely heavily on curbside pickup. In regards to your fourth question, logistics of closing, the Downtown Management Board does recognize that it will be a challenge to close the street midday. They have advised that they'll follow the procedures that they do for other midday events like parades, whereby they'll put signage up at those spaces early in the day to indicate that the spaces as of 4 p.m. will become unavailable and that no cars can be there at that time. And they'll follow the standard procedures that they do in any parade in terms of enforcement and marketing of that.
You good, Tim? I have Pat and then Rob.
Thank you. Well, as oh dear, the garbage truck's going by. As most of you know, I'm both a downtown shopper and a downtown eater. So I'm very much in favor of this whole project. I think it'd be a great boon for our downtown. I did have a couple of questions. I wondered if it's possible to expand it, maybe not in the very beginning, but as we move along, so that on the Saturday we move it forward so that we close for lunchtime. And my reasoning around that is that when I talked to a number of friends about this and ran the whole idea past it, and we all agreed that what we would really like to do is have lunch and then go shopping. Because if you close it at 4 o'clock, there's no time to shop after that, really. And there are a number of sort of small restaurants in town, and I tried to make a list of the ones that aren't open for supper, so it's not going to benefit them. And I sort of I made a list of about 5 or 6 of them that aren't open for the dinner hour. And if we're trying to try to make it available for as many as possible, then there's a group of them that wouldn't help at all. So I know that we want to do this in stages, but is there an opportunity to expand it if it proves to be popular? Because women like to lunch, and they like to shop after lunch. So I wondered if there's a possibility of moving forward to expand it.
First of all, yes, Pat, I believe that you probably are a shopper downtown and eater downtown, but you also spent a while on the Downtown Management Board, so you bring that perspective. I know you mentioned the number of eateries that might close up. But I know in the report it talks about a number that might be involved. So maybe I see Ted's hand up there if you'd like to jump in here.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. A number of those eaters that you have spoken about, Pat, have indicated that they will, in fact, make an effort to be open that on the Friday evening and provide an evening meal. But that doesn't address the other point that you're making. And all I can say is that we're going to start modestly. We're going to see how it works. If in fact the demand is there, if in fact the retailers in the downtown become supportive of this effort, then there is no question that an expansion into all day Saturday is totally possible. My only recommendation is to you would be to change your mental state and shop first, then eat after.
Sage advice, Councillor. Only you expect that from a veteran. Anyway, Mason, I believe that we may have you. Sorry, Rob, I have you do next in queue, but I'm still trying to fit Mason in. So, Mason, if you're ready and able, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, through you, Mayor Clark. Can you hear me okay?
Can so. I like how you're not moving your lips, but I can hear you. So maybe you could be a ventriloquist busker on a Friday night.
Perfect. So first of all, thank you to Marcia. We still have not fixed the issue. So just so everyone is aware, the issue was my microphone in my laptop. I was not working the first time I was on my personal laptop, and it worked at the very beginning of the meeting because I had a good conversation with Marcia, and then something happened. And then we switched to my city laptop, and then it's actually working worse than my personal laptop was before. So that's been super fun. But anyways, I did want to weigh in on this, and my sincerest apologies if I repeat anything that somebody said, because it's been kind of difficult to try to get this all solved and listen to everybody's every point at the same time.
We're gonna give you a pretty good license right now.
I appreciate that a lot, Mayor Clark. My first thing I just wanted to do, I wanted to thank Councillor Emond and the rest of the committee for all of the hard work they've done. Myself hearing from multiple different businesses in the downtown area and then different people across the community, I know there is a whole bunch of ideas, and a lot of people think that it's just something that you can snap your fingers and make everything perfect all at once. Unfortunately, we are living in tough times and in the real world where not every solution is going to make everybody happy. So we need to make the tough decisions. And sometimes those tough decisions are trying new things and trying to accommodate as many businesses and as many people as possible. I do think this is a good solution moving forward. And the reason for that is the nice thing is it starts to phase it in. So, you start with the Friday evenings, and then, we do that for a little bit and then go into the Friday, Saturday. And the reality is if things go really badly off the start, and we're hearing from a ton of businesses that, hey, this isn't working, we're suffering as a result of this, it's something we can bring back up to council and say, hey, maybe we should change this, go in a different direction. But if it's something that is going well, that's, wonderful for a lot of people. I know there's, certain restaurants that want to have more space for people, and there's some businesses that, just want to have people in their store and are worried about the parking. I think this is something that meets in the middle. And the reality is, we're trying to help people, and obviously it takes a bit of time. As anybody who's read through the report sees, there's a lot of work that goes into these. They're not just overnight decisions that affect people's livelihoods and affect people in our community. So we need to, take the adequate time to discuss them and make sure we come up with good options. I think this committee has done that, and I'm really impressed with the work you folks have done. The one question I did have, though, was in regards to the budget and the numbers. I saw that I think it was 12,500 is in regards to animation. I do see that with that, it talks about how, animation is pretty restrictive right now. And by animation, I mean that, people performing on the street, that sort of thing. What I want to make sure is that we don't go towards, having a street festival every weekend, and that this is more focused on those businesses. So I'm curious on some of the rationale for this. Obviously, it's something that it says in the report that it's going to be phased in the future when it's something that's available, whether it's, antique cars or that sort of thing. I know my primary focus on this is supporting those businesses and giving them more space, not necessarily bringing people downtown to sit on chairs and to watch performers and that sort of thing. So I was hoping maybe a member of the committee could comment on that, and then maybe I'll go from there. Thank you.
Thanks, Mason. Glad to have you in the conversation. Some very good comments, and I know the one we did speak briefly a few minutes ago about the animation of the street, but certainly Laura or Ted or whomever, would you mind addressing that again, if you wouldn't mind? Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. That is something that we've looked at in terms of how do we phase this in safely. I will say that the 12,500 is the upward budget, starting not the first week, but starting the second week, if we start the second week. The thinking there and the thinking of asking for it at this time rather than waiting until we know when it's going to be open is that unfortunately things seem to be happening quickly. So we are not given much advance notice when the restrictions are lifted. We do anticipate that the stage 3 restrictions will be lifted in the coming weeks. So we want to make sure that we're ready to implement as soon as possible. I will also say that we are looking at ways that we can implement free or low cost animation of the street, but we're also cognizant that the arts and culture sector has also taken a hit. So we want to make sure that we do support those local entertainers and arts and culture professionals if we can do so. So I will say that 12,500 is absolutely the upward limit, and we were asking for the full amount in this report so that we can implement quickly and efficiently once the provincial restrictions have been lifted.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura. And through you, Mayor Clark, if it's okay, just with that being said, I'm happy to support this option moving forward. I'm not quite sure if I missed it actually getting put on the table and moved and seconded, but I'd happy to get involved in that if the time comes, or if I missed that, my apologies.
No, you have not missed it. I think, but thank you for that, because I think we're getting close to having the time to have. I think we're getting close to the time where the resolution should be introduced. So, Rob, I'll let you weigh in here, and then I will ask Robin to put the proposed resolution up on the screen.
Yes, thank you, through you, Mayor Clark. I just had another technical question in regards to parking. If a delivery vehicle or somebody is on the street around 3:30 and they get stuck in the bank or the pharmacy, for example, waiting for a prescription, will they get ticketed, or will they be towed out of the way, or there'll be some leniency to say, okay, I was stuck in the bank or the pharmacy and I need to, basically, can you open up the barriers and let me through, so that there's no arguments on the street, no police are called or anything like that, that people for a legitimate reason can certainly get through the barrier. That's all.
I'm guessing I'm going to throw that back or throw it to Ted.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. The approach that I believe will be taken by the DOMB, because they'll be managing this, is the one they typically take. Anyone who's on the street who is finishing up a transaction, as you suggested, a pharmacy, will certainly be allowed to leave. Once the barrier's up, those that are seeking to enter the street will be prevented and will be given an indication of where they can park to get foot access. There will be always an opening on the street for emergency vehicles if that's an unfortunate requirement at any time during the closure. So everything we'll do in terms of executing on this closure is to do it in a way that is as courteous and as comfortable for all of our citizens during the period.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Clark, and I will support this moving forward. As Mason has said, we have to start somewhere, and it's not going to please everyone, but I think it's a good step in the right direction, and let's have some success with this. Thanks.
Great, thank you both, Rob and Ted, for your input there. Robin, if you would be so kind as to put the proposed resolution on the screen, and then I think I heard that Mason would like to be involved in moving this forward. So I will read it, and I will, I'm sure everybody's familiar with it because of the report. I'll give you just a moment to glance at it. Then I'll remove it so that I can see all the smiling faces or frowning faces, and then I'll ask for a mover and a seconder. And with that, Robin, I'll ask you to remove it so I can see the full screen of council again. Wow, good timing. Mover, I think Mason, is that you moving it? And Ralph, are you seconding? Thank you. I will read it now, then I will entertain. Thank you for their discussion. Moved by Mason, seconded by Ralph, that is recommended the report ERTF 2003 dated June 29th, 2020 from the Economic Recovery Task Force. The following temporary downtown road closures be approved on Friday and or Saturday evenings from July 10th to September 5th on Mississauga Street East, between Front Street and Andrew Street, and on Peter Street South between Mississauga Street East and Colburn Street East, and that the road closures must adhere to the following conditions. The cross streets will remain open except Mississauga Street and Peter Street South as noted above. A 6-meter right-of-way fire route down the center of the closed streets be maintained at all times to comply with fire and safety regulations, and access to fire hydrants and fire department connections, sprinkler and or standpipe must be maintained, and the barriers be removed on Friday evening and replaced on the Saturday afternoon, and the whole intersections remain clear to allow for turning of emergency vehicles, and that $30,000 be authorized and be appropriated from the Social Assistance and Recovery COVID-19 Emergency Relief Fund for signage and marketing to promote the road closure, animation of the street during road closures, sanitation stations, and the retention of the Downtown Orillia Management Board staff to open and close the street during street closures. Is there any further questions, comments? Ralph, and then Tim.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of things. One is the $30,000. There is a way that we can alleviate some of it by the federal government just announced that there's $5,000 for university students for the summer. And I'm wondering if either the BIA or the city or whoever can apply for that $5,000 to help with his street closures on the 2 weeks or the 2 months that we're going to be doing it. And A, it gives jobs to university students that there are very few jobs available for them. And B, it cuts the budget from $30,000 down to maybe 15 or whatever. So I'm just wondering if that's possible. The second thing is that I totally support this as well. Restaurants are a key to bringing people to the downtown as well, and that's one of the key issues. One of the key reasons I totally support this is to bring people downtown and that. So the other thing is I don't see that the Matchedash intersection is open because it is a one-way street going north, and if it's closed, people coming off Front Street onto Colburn and then there's no way, and Peter Street is closed as well, so they'd have to go all the way up to West Street. So I'm just wondering if Matchedash can still be open both ways. So those are my two questions. I think it's really interesting that the federal government can and will subsidize the $5,000 to hire university students for the summer, and we could also do that for many other areas in our community and cut down on the use of taxpayers' funds.
Okay, thanks for those questions. First of all, I do know the city is usually well versed on what grant opportunities are available. I'm not sure if Laura, if you're able to address that specific question, but if you are, that would be great. If not, then we'll have to get an answer for Ralph subsequently. Laura?
I can certainly forward that information on to Lisa Thompson-Roop at the Downtown Management Board as she considers the hiring of staff.
Thank you for that. The other thing on will the Matchedash, I mean, according to this, I believe the answer is there, but can you just confirm that the intersection around Matchedash Street and Mississauga Street will be maintained as open?
At this time, the report does contemplate that intersection remaining open. Yes.
Great.
Thank you.
Tim.
Thanks, Mayor Clark. I will be supporting this. I think I'm very mindful of some of the comments that some folks have made. And I think that it's probably easier to have a complete failure or a complete success than it is to have a complete sweet spot middle point success. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this unfolds. Certainly, if we ended up with the crowds that some of the sidewalk sales produce, we're going to have the same problem, coincidentally, that we're about to discuss in our parks, that we'll be suffering from too much success. But I do have one last question. As I say, I'm going to support this and certainly let it evolve and see what happens. But I do have a question about masks that Ralph referred to earlier. It seems to be that the medical community feels that masks are a benefit to interior spaces and to crowd situations where social distancing becomes a problem and is an issue. And given the Simcoe Health people seem to be a little bit reluctant or tiptoeing around this particular issue, I'm wondering, does this council, if we were a success and decided that maybe masks had to be implemented, does this council have the ability to bring that in alone, or do we have to rely on the health authorities?
I will begin to address that particular question, and if Madam CAO wishes to jump in, I would welcome that, or even our fire chief and or JR, who's on the EMC with me. Well, I can tell you that we discuss the mask issue, I believe, at every EMC meeting. We do get requests for it, sometimes just one or two, sometimes more, to contemplate mandatory mask usage. Certainly, we have actually jumped out a little ahead of our local Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit, or our medical officers of health, in promoting it in situations where it wasn't necessarily being recommended. But yeah, we are strongly recommending with all of our communication that masks be worn in the interior of any public building, and or in any situation where you can't properly physically distance. So we are hopeful, because all along we have taken the lead of our medical officer of health, Dr. Gardner. Although we do have the ability to adjudicate information that comes to us, we are not medical experts, and our Muskoka Health Unit, those folks are. So we're hoping that they take the lead. I understand there's a key meeting today that may help clarify the situation. Having said all that, yes, council, my understanding is that council does have the ability to make that decision. My understanding is that the EMC probably has the ability to make that decision as well. And we may very well end up there. If we are going to go in that direction, that is not something that should be thought about, put forward without thinking of all the consequences. Because one of the significant issues around this is enforcement. And so those are the conversations that we're having right now. But I would suggest stay tuned on that one. I'm hoping that there's some more news on that today. It does seem, Tim, and I know Jay has been in constant contact with members of the EMC about this particular issue, that masks are showing themselves to be effective in the slowing of transmission of the COVID virus, in that if you're wearing a mask, Tim, and you're with Ted, then you're protecting Ted. You're not protecting yourself very much. There's very little data to show that wearing a mask actually protects the mask user. But if you're both wearing one, then you're both providing that protection, and apparently it is a significantly safer situation. So I'm just going to go out on my own from the EMC for a moment and suggest it's a very hot button topic at the moment, and I suspect that we will land somewhere on this very, very shortly. I hope that helps. And Brent or JR, or Madam CAO, you're okay? Brent or JR, if there's anything you wish to add to that, please do. Okay. Ralph, I believe I saw your hand in the air. I think this is some other people haven't utilized their time, so I'll give you some of theirs.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have an email from Dr. Gardner with the team asked me to reach out to Ted asked me to reach out to Dr. Gardner regarding face masks. And he says here, as a municipal council, you can pass such a bylaw. We will be discussing that at the CAO's meeting teleconference on Thursday, which is today. So Dr. Gardner has indicated that council does have the authority to pass bylaw regarding the masks within our community and within our community and public places. So.
Thank you for that. I don't want to get too far off of the subject before us. I think Tim's concern was that if we are, if the streets are animated, they become very vibrant, and physical distancing becomes an issue, that's where we should probably have mask usage to keep it a safe environment. So that's just, I don't want to get in on the decision of the making of the mask, because that's not really what this meeting is about. The only thing I will add is I know it's certainly the EMC's preference to have the health unit make the decision and the health unit enforce the mask issue. If it's left to the city, I will tell you right now, our Milos, and if you happen to bump into one of our bylaw officers in the next few days, don't give them a real hug, but please maybe give them a virtual hug. They have gone above and beyond. They have worked hours that are not their traditional hours. They have been involved with issues that are not their traditional issues. They've done so with a smile on their face, but it has been very, very, very taxing. So the enforcement issue with masks, were we to add that, would doesn't mean we can't do it. We've just got to think that through before we jump to that conclusion. But I am hoping, Ralph, that meeting that you alluded to today with Dr. Gardner and the CAOs, which certainly will include our own Madam CAO, will bear some fruit. Mason, one final comment.
Yes, through you, Mayor Clark, not to dive in on the mask. I think that's definitely a different conversation. But what I did want to leave everybody with is this isn't, a motion that council just kind of came up with and said, hey, it'd be really cool to close down the street. This is something that the Downtown Management Board, as well as many businesses, have reached out and said, hey, we need something to help us out. Here's a potential solution, and we're going forward with that. I think that's something really important to remember at the end of the day. And the reality is, hopefully it works. And if it doesn't work, we'll try to figure out something that works better.
Great indeed. And thank you for that, Mason. And being conscientious of our time, we have another report coming forward. Ted, a final comment?
I do, Mayor Clark, thank you. And I just want to comment very quickly that though the focus of this particular resolution is in our downtown, I want all the businesses outside the downtown to understand that the Economic Recovery Task Force is equally concerned about their ability to recover productively from the pandemic, and that we are looking at options and alternatives to assist them as well. Only exampled by the phase one, where we put in place an expedited process by which food providers outside the downtown could, in fact, have patios expanded and patios agreed to. So we work at this across the piece. But just to reassure those that we're not totally and completely only focused on the downtown, we're concerned about businesses everywhere across our city and in every sector of our economy.
Thanks, Tim. Anyway, without seeing any other hands in the air, except to tell the chair to turn on his gosh darn microphone, I will now call the question. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. And just a final note to Chair Ted and Ralph and David, who are on that the ERTF, and Lori and Laura. Laura Thompson and Dan and Michael and JR, and to Ted Markle, who brings his business expertise, and Ron, who's very passionate about a number of aspects of COVID. I just want to say from the mayor's seat and the chair of this, as chair of this meeting, thank you for all of your efforts before, now, and going forward. So thank you for that. That is carried, and we'll move on to our second report. With respect to an issue that I will just very briefly introduce it. Sorry, Ted, you want to jump in here?
Mayor Clark, just on a personal note, I was wondering if we might take a 3-minute break now, because I have a feeling this discussion is going to take a while, and I'm beginning to sense that a break will be necessary.
All right, well, you go sharpen your pencil.
I will do that.
All right, anyway, so with council's blessing, we'll recess until 10:25. I'll round it off, but it'll be a sharp. So moved by Ted, second by Mason. All in favor? See you in a few minutes. Welcome back. We're now into our second item. As we all know, I will ask Madam CEO to introduce the report in a moment. But we have had an issue arise with I think we believe that our community has been very good for the most part in terms of compliance with the restrictions. And certainly as a result, we've been very successful in keeping the numbers of COVID cases in the area down, and even in our LTCs, our long-term care centers, and certainly with transmission within the community. And that is absolutely vital. It is absolutely necessary and will be until there is a vaccine that has made its way through the population, which, as we all understand, is likely still many months away, maybe well into next year. With that being said, we've had an issue at the waterfront. We were a very desirable place to live and work, but also come and visit. And I understand that three plus months of essential isolation drive people to want to take care of that cabin fever issue and visit areas such as Orillia. But unfortunately, that has caused some issues that we've all heard about as members of council in terms of large groups and perhaps not physical distancing. Many of the visitors have been wonderful and very compliant, but certainly many have not. And we are not the only municipality facing this. As you can see in the report, there's some benchmarking with respect to parking, et cetera, and boat launches and other communities. I just heard Mayor Lindell this morning on CBC Radio. They already had put measures in place and are still having issues. And apparently yesterday, they turned away 1,000 cars. And because they were having some of the issues that we have experienced. I understand. Anyway, so with that being said, staff, and I will commend them for this, even just a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, this wasn't an issue, but it reared its head a couple of weekends ago, and then certainly last weekend. And staff, under the leadership of our CAO, have just scurried together and created the report before you. And with that being said, I'll be quiet and ask Gail to introduce the report.
Thanks very much, Mayor Clark. And at the risk of maybe repeating a little bit of what you've said, I just will take a little longer than what I would normally do in terms of introducing the report, because of the fact that this issue is obviously front and center for a number of people. So I want to take the opportunity just to go through the report and speak a little bit about the different options that are contained within the report. So as Mayor Clark alluded to, certainly members of council, the Emergency Management Committee, and staff are fielding a number of calls from residents expressing concerns about the number of visitors coming within our community during the COVID-19 pandemic. And as Mayor Clark very clearly, and we fully agree that, a lot of visitors are absolutely complying with safety precautions. There are certainly a number that are not, and the number that are not are the sort of large gatherings, et cetera. So the purpose of this report is essentially to seek council's direction in terms of what type of program, if any, council would be supportive of to deal with the circumstance that we're faced with. And if I can just take a quick moment, and as council will recall, certainly, our vision through our strategic plan process is that Orillia is progressive, sustainable, offering an exceptional quality of life, vibrant culture, beautiful waterfronts, and compassionate, welcoming, and inclusive community. And absolutely, I think that, that is a very strong statement and a very positive statement. However, as everyone is well aware, we're faced with the COVID-19 pandemic. And our strategy, which would normally be to promote Orillia as a tourist destination, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we're going to have to shift dramatically. And certainly the focus is on the safety of our community. So with that, what we've got before you, members of council, are some options in terms of putting some controls in place with respect to our access to our waterfront areas. And so the options that you have before you, council, include the following. The first option is a sort of short-term waterfront parking boat launch strategy that would ensure that our residents have and continue to have full access to our waterfront parking and the boat launch areas. And so the residents would be able to continue to park and use our boat launch areas without any issues of concern. But what we would propose is a strategy that would have us distribute resident parking passes. And so those resident parking passes would be distributed to Orillia residents. They would need to come pick those up in a variety of locations throughout the city. We'll set up kiosks to enable residents to pick up their passes. And at this point, because it is a sort of short-term strategy, we would look to those to those passes actually expiring at the end of September 2020. If non-residents come into our community and they wish to park, they would primarily focus in parking in the BIA area. Right now, a lot of the lots in the BIA area are 5-hour limits, so we would look to reduce those 5-hour limits to 2 hours. And with that, if they've parked beyond that, there would be strict enforcement, which I'll get into in just a moment. The streets surrounding the waterfront areas would also be available for resident parking only. And so consequently, if non-residents do come within our community and they're thinking that perhaps they could park in the adjacent streets, those streets within a certain radius would actually be deemed as resident parking only. And those residents that potentially have visitors, we would look for those residents to park on the street and allow their visitors to park within their driveways. The boat launch scenario under option 1 would be that we would close the boat launches to non-residents from Thursday to Sunday, from July the 8th to September 13th, also including August the 3rd. The launches will actually be staffed from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And if the residents would like to use the launches, they would just need to ensure that they've got their resident parking pass to prove that they are, in fact, a local resident. And for those private property owners that would look to potentially open up their property for commercial purposes, parking purposes, we would certainly commence enforcement with respect to zoning. So if in fact they're zoned properly, that would be fine. However, if they're not zoned properly, then they would be subjected to zoning enforcement. The enforcement strategy will be a very strong strategy in the sense that there will be continued enforcement with respect to the gathering provision, the provincial order, and strict enforcement with respect to parking, so the issuance of parking tickets and vehicle removal for those vehicles that are that do not have a resident pass. And with that, we would be looking to hire an additional municipal law enforcement officer. And if I can just take this opportunity, because certainly Mayor Clark very clearly indicated in the previous discussion, the report, the municipal law enforcement officers have gone above and beyond. Sean's team, Jess, Jeff, and Tim and Avery, between enforcing the provincial orders and our emergency measures bylaw, and also picking up responsibilities from the SPCA. They have gone above and beyond. And so implementing this type of strategy, part of the process would absolutely be that we would need council to give full support to the enforcement strategy, because a few vehicles being towed, as I'm sure members of council can appreciate, will cause quite the upset. So option 1 is essentially enabling full access to our waterfront areas and our boat launches for residents, but not for non-residents. Option 2 is a short-term strategy again. However, it is a blend between a resident / non-resident strategy whereby the residents would again have full access to the waterfront and the launch areas. However, non-residents would have to pay $50 for parking per day, and non-residents would also have to pay $50 per day for launching their boat. So that is the essential difference between the two. Is that the first option is full access for our residents. Option 2 provides a further option for non-residents, but they will have to pay $50 for the use of the launch and $50 for parking. So the further option contained within the report, Mr. Mayor, is that due to the what we believe to be a pretty significant safety issue, is that if we can't get controls around our waterfront areas, that the other option could be that the waterfront parks and beach areas and launches close. As Council will recall, early on in COVID, we were certainly faced with closing our beach areas, closing our launch areas to all. And so that is an option set out, option number 3. And option number 4 is essentially to receive the report as information, which will mean essentially that no further action be taken, and we'll continue with what we've been doing in terms of enforcement and so on. So this report, if I can, Mr. Mayor, certainly has been prepared in very short order. And so fleshing out some of the details will be, if council wishes to move forward, we would work through those details. We would require some additional staffing. We will require also potentially deployment of, redeployment of other staff. And if council is wishing to head in this direction, staff would deem it to be a priority, which means that other responsibilities and accountabilities will have to be put on the back burner in order to move this strategy forward. I think that it's important because it is a very significant issue. And so what staff would like certainly council to turn their minds to are a variety of things. I won't get into all of them, but just as just to capture a few, the impact that this type of program can have in terms of Orillia as a tourist destination. And certainly we will do whatever we can do to minimize the impact, but certainly having the residents come and pick up their parking passes, just ensuring that that strategy is straightforward so that it doesn't cause upset for our residents. The economic impact of deterring visitors to our community is certainly another aspect that we would want council to turn their minds to. The other is certainly the impact it has on our neighboring municipalities who absolutely shop, dine, and work within our city. At this point, it would be very challenging to move forward with a strategy that would include not only Orillia residents, but also neighboring municipalities. So at this point, the focus would be residents and non-residents. The other piece within this report is just to remind council that there is certainly a longer term strategy that would enable council and the consultants that we are moving forward with respect to our parking study to actually evaluate a longer term strategy for the use of our waterfront parks and our boat launch. And if council is looking to ensure that that strategy is considered as part of that capital project, then we would just get council to provide us direction to ensure that that is included within the scope. The one sort of remaining piece, if I can, Mr. Mayor, is the fact that, and an important piece is that because we've needed to expedite this particular issue, there really has been no consultation. And so with that, there's always risk. I think Orillia does a pretty fantastic job in terms of reaching out to the residents. I think of the work that the RTF has done and the amount of time and energy spent on the public consultation piece. This particular strategy is one because we've needed to expedite, has not gone through a public consultation process. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I will stop talking and hand it back to you. And certainly the report is presented on behalf of the Emergency Management Committee. So consequently, if there are any questions, the team is available to respond. And we also have other staff members who have been instrumental in assisting in putting this report together, available for further questions as well.
Thanks for that very much, Gail. A very good introduction. When this really started rearing its head after the previous weekend, not last weekend, last week to the EMC, and then it was we did an informal polling of members of council. It was overwhelmingly decided, or the result was overwhelming decision to bring it to the table for discussion. So that is why it's here. But that did mean that, as again led by Gail and multi-departmental input over the last number of days, they really have scurried to put this together. So I just want to say thank you to all involved, and a number of them are involved in this meeting today, or this call. And so with that being said, I'm sure there'll be some discussion. We'll start with Mason.
Sure. Through you, Mayor Clark. First of all, thank you so much for staff for putting this together. I know this is a very politically sensitive topic. And just before I start off, I know I've received a whole bunch of emails, Facebook messages, and phone calls on this matter. To start things off, though, I think it's important to look at what the problems are before we start talking about some of the behind-the-scenes stuff. A big issue I've heard from a lot of people is the social distancing being the major priority. Is, there's big groups that aren't social distancing, so that's something to think about. A second one is being, there's a lot of litter that gets left behind. A third one is, I can't find a parking space because there's people parked everywhere. Some people say that, most of these people are from out of town. That could be accurate, but we're not sure. We can't really track all those license plates at the moment. And then, another thing is people, cooking in the parks, that sort of thing, dumping the hibachis on the ground. That sort of kind of stuff. And then there's the other side, which is, people coming into the community who are not from here. But also we hear from our business community that they get a ton of business from people who do come from outside of Orillia, and that while they're here, they do a lot of their shopping, whether it be at a retail place or going to check out a restaurant. So I just think these are certain, variables to keep in mind throughout this discussion. I think the big thing to remember with all this is a lot of these particular issues or items are not just COVID related. When we talk about things like littering and taking up parking spaces, well, these have been, issues for some people for many years in the past. Big groups coming up from, whether it's from the city or wherever we think they come from, and taking up some of those spaces and, leaving some of their trash behind. So I think a big part of this is that enforcement component. And, moving forward, I think looking at the solutions for some of these things are really important. And when you look at the COVID and you look at the littering and you look at, the social distancing problem, well, the big thing to help that is increased enforcement. So supporting bylaw. But then, the question comes down to, okay, well, where does that money come from? So obviously, as we know, it just doesn't come out of thin air. So looking at a solution for that, and I think there's been some pretty decent solutions in the report. And I think it's very important to realize that, our residents are paying their taxes. That's their fee for using the park at this point in time. And I think that's important to keep that going, and for residents to have free access to our parks, because at the end of the day, technically it's not free. They're paying for it with their taxes, and that's something important to acknowledge. But from people who are outside of the community, unless they own a business in the community or rental property, the majority of them are not paying taxes. So I think it's only fair that they're paying their fair share for use of these facilities. It's just like for the last couple of days, I was up north at a provincial park. Well, we paid to use that provincial park. And, we paid, and the money that we paid goes towards maintenance, whether that's, cleaning up litter. You hope that people don't litter, but the reality is people litter, unfortunately. So we need money that goes towards, hiring staff to clean those kind of things up. And then, the social distancing of making sure that people are actually social distancing appropriately, and that comes to enforcement. So I think it's only fair that people who are from out of town pay their fair share. When we get to that pricing, I know there's some different options. I personally think, and I've talked to a few people already, that $50 is just a little bit outrageous. Let's say we have a member of council who lives outside of town. Well, if they want to bring their grandkids down to the park for 10, 15, 20 minutes, well, now they have to pay $50. That seems a little too high. I think that paying is totally fine. I could see, maybe a half day being, $10, and if you want to park for the full day, being $20, because that creates that revenue, which allows us to hire more bylaw enforcement, more park maintenance, that sort of stuff, which really addresses those issues, which is this, A, the social distancing, B, the littering, and the parking. People are going to be paying for that parking. So for people who are in town that are upset that, hey, these people aren't paying taxes in our community, but they're taking my parking spaces. Well, now they're going to be paying for that. So I think that's going to help with that particular issue. In regards to the boat launch, not supportive of having staff standing there from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. all day long. I think that's a little excessive. I think that you could easily fix that and have a solution for that by just charging for parking. Because let's say, in option 2, for instance, if you're paying $50 to park and then you're paying $50 to launch, now you're paying $100 to come and launch your boat in Orillia. And we also, as much as we want to reduce some people coming to Orillia and such, we also don't want to hurt our businesses that are here. We want to make sure that we have a delicate balance. And I think that balance can be achieved by supporting our bylaw enforcement so that we can patrol and make sure people are socially distanced, having some of the stations we talked about earlier in regards to the downtown so that people who do come, even if they're from Orillia or they're from elsewhere, they can feel safe and say, hey, here's a station where I can get some hand sanitizer, having those discussions about masks, that sort of thing. But I think that price tag being $50 is a little excessive. I'd be much more comfortable with 10 for a half day and 20 for a full day. And that's regardless if you're just using the park or you're launching your boat. Kind of kills 2 birds with 1 stone. And then we're reducing costs. We're not paying a staff to just stand there all day. Let's say it's a cloudy, crappy day out and no one's launching their boat. Well, you just paid for 12 hours for somebody to stand there. Wouldn't you rather have that to, go around the community and make sure there's less litter, make sure that people who are coming in groups are social distancing from other groups? It just seems kind of simple in that way. And I will just leave it at those comments, Mr. Mayor. I've kind of talked enough and we'll see where other folks are at.
Thanks for that, Mason. Again, I think Madam CAO has introduced the report, so I'll let her probably take the lead on most of these questions. But if anybody else from EMC wishes to jump in, please do.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if I may, just certainly excellent points, Councillor Ainsworth. One of the issues that we're grappling with is how do we put these controls in place? And so ideally, it would be great if we had that ability to put technology, i.e. a pay and display machine as an example. But in order to do that, we're looking at minimum 6 weeks in order to do that. And so that takes us well into August. And this short-term strategy is just that, is a short-term strategy that quite frankly is meant to be put in place as soon as possible. So we will need people power in terms of being the resource to enable payment if we're heading towards a payment type scenario. So we would need to have staff with point of sale machines as a mechanism in order to enable those non-residents to actually pay. I can tell you that in discussions with neighboring municipalities, and I think Mayor Clark alluded to this earlier, but maybe can elaborate, in Innisville, as an example, certainly they're dealing with this particular circumstance, and people are quite happy to actually pay a $75 parking fine in order to use the beach for the day. And especially if you have, fairly large groups and so on, they share those costs. Down the street in Barrie, certainly their proposal is $50 a day or $10 an hour. So if we're going to head in this direction, we would want to keep our minds attuned to, what is a reasonable amount and what is the overall purpose of why we're doing what we're doing. And so that is just a few comments I have, and certainly Jen or Brent, if you have anything further, or Mayor Clark, just from the EMC's perspective.
I'll jump in, and if JR Brent wants to jump in, we're welcome to. Mason, you bring up some very, very good points. And again, we're someone intimately involved with this on a daily basis. But you're right. I think you've identified the major issues. That's large gatherings, lack of social distancing or physical distancing, the S and litter. And of course, some residents not being able to access parking because it's unavailable. Just a couple of points. The boat launches have presented some significant lack of physical distancing situations. There is nobody there to enforce. We just do not have the manpower, and so I do believe that this report or this resolution should cover off boat launches as well. Again, what we're proposing right now is just a short-term solution, and ask staff to come back perhaps this fall with something that could be presented to council for consideration on an ongoing basis. And it is counterintuitive. Mason, you talked about bringing people to the area and spending some money. I mean, we've got this wonderful new department right now led by JR and with their staff, the business development and marketing, and they have spent the better part of the last quite a number of months preparing materials and videos and say, hey, this is how beautiful it really is. Come and visit it. Come and spend part of your summer here and spend some money. Unfortunately, COVID has changed all that, and some of the behaviors within COVID has changed that. The one caution I would say, because you're right, Mason, when I first started hearing that, $50, that type of thing being thrown around, I'm going, boy, that is steep. But it does need to be significant enough to change behavior. And I heard clearly from Mayor Dolan in Innisfil that people are apparently appearing to be very, very glad to pay $75 to park their car illegally for the day, take a $75 ticket and chalk it up to the expense of the day. If we come in too much underneath that and underneath where Barrie is, then we will be seen as an attractive place still to come, and people will be glad to pay that minor fee. So I do get your point, and you're exactly where I was even about a week ago. But I have since changed my mind just because of what's going on and what is being successful and not successful in other communities. Brent or JR, did you wish to hop in on this? Okay. I think that's about Mason. I hope we addressed your questions and concerns, and glad to have you jump back in. I've got Ralph, and then I've got Tim, and then Pat, and then Rob. Hold on, I got to write this down.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As same as what Mason, as I've had over 18 emails within the last couple of days, and one of the emails really put it right in perspective. Then the issue of parking permits, resident limited numbers, stop the tents. People are using them as toilets, and there's no social distancing taking place. It's a couple of the people, but one of the things that we could do less expensive is let the chamber deal with the launch that they must go and get a permit there. So we don't need a person at the launch ramp for 12 hours or 8 hours, whatever it is. They must go to the chamber office to get a permit to launch their boat. The other thing, my wife and I traveled around the Terry Fox circle yesterday, and we noticed that 90% of the cars there had stickers from out of town. And a couple of people stopped me and said, "There's no place for me as I'm really in the park," and everything else. And Mason, if I'm one of the councillors who lives out of town, I'd be glad to pay $50 to have my family or whatever it is, or my grandkids, to take them down there as long as it protects the safety of our community and our citizens. I think the main goal of this is to protect our citizens. And there were tents on Moose Beach because we went in there for a minute to check it out, because I went to check it out because of today's meeting. There was tents on the beach itself, on the sand. And my understanding from this gentleman and this lady's email is that some of those people, she was there, and some of those people were using the tents as washrooms. And that kind of thing can't happen in our community. We just can't. And the $50, it's $20 to park in downtown Toronto at any given time. I go visit my daughter when in downtown, or my son in downtown Toronto, pay $20 to park at any given time. So I think the staff has done an excellent job on the report, and I really favor option 2, which is the $50, and let the chamber charge the $50 to launch the. And again, we could use summer students. You could, from the tour that we did, a few of the people that were with us said, okay, why don't you just barricade Tecumseh Street and the street, and the only entrance into that park is from the waterfront there by the chamber office, and that. So we could eliminate some of the costs that are in this report by just barricading them properly, or cement blocks, whatever we want to do on there as well. So there is an opportunity here, and our main goal here is to protect the citizens of our community and allow them to use our public facilities. And as you said, Mason, that they pay the taxes all year round here, and it's really important that we do. So I would be prepared to move option 2 for the $50.
Thanks for that. One thing Mason, just before I go back to you as a kind of a follow-up to your original point, was I was also sensitive to our township neighbors, because as you well indicated, they are our coaches, they are our volunteers, they are a significant economic driver of this community. I am satisfied personally that a short-term solution may not be easy to implement for them, but certainly I believe that a longer-term solution, which would start next year and go beyond, may very well be able to contemplate what we could do for our surrounding neighbors, because to me, they are an extension of our community. Mason, so you'd like to hop back in here?
Yes, through you, Mayor Clark. Just following up on a couple things that were mentioned there. The first one being Madam CEO's in regards to the 6 weeks for the pay and display. Yeah, that is extremely long. Honestly, surprised it'll take that long. So with that being said, would be happy to, whether it's those barricades and having staff there doing those permits with the machines when people do come up. I think that is completely acceptable, especially given that timeline. In regards to Councillor Sepulveda's points, he talked about some interesting things as well as you, Mayor Clark, in regards to other municipalities, Innisfil being an example of people being happy to pay that $75, fine to bring their families and things like that. So clearly, money is not really the issue when it comes to a lot of these things. And then so we need to really think about, okay, well, what is the issue? Do we have a problem with people coming to our community and enjoying our parks? I don't think that's the case. I think we're happy to have people come from outside of our community to use these parks. Now, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, my issue with the cost, for instance, if, Councillor Valaket Thompson from Severn wants to come in and, see the tree that council donated, to her daughter, probably shouldn't have to pay $50 to go and walk over and see that tree. That seems a little excessive. But, I get away from the issue, which is really, I think that the issue at the end of the day is enforcement. And I think the big issue that people are having is social distancing and the littering, or, doing things that you're not supposed to do in the park. I know Councillor Sepulveda mentioned, people, potentially using them as washrooms, that sort of thing. Well, obviously that's disgusting and not acceptable, but that's an enforcement issue. If people are doing things that they're not supposed to be doing in the parks, whether they're from Orillia or whether they're from outside of Orillia, it's an enforcement issue. And I can tell you 100% accurate that people who live in Orillia, some of them also litter. It's not just people from out of town. So it's making sure we put money towards that enforcement so that if there are large crowds who are coming, we make sure that they're doing it in a safe way. And maybe some of those crowds that people assume are people from all sorts of different areas are actually one big family that all lives together. Assumptions can be very dangerous. And especially when, I hear comments coming back to me from some people who actually do live in Orillia that might be a different nationality and are hearing things like, go back to your country or go back to the city you're from and things like that are completely unacceptable. We need to look at what are the issues and make sure that we're addressing those issues. And I really do believe that the issue is enforcement. So making sure we do support that moving forward. I don't think this is about, being afraid of people from elsewhere. I think it's about, hey, we're worried that a virus could spread throughout our community if people aren't social distancing properly. Well, if we address those issues and we address the issue of littering and, we address the issue of parking, we're going to be fixing those things. And I think we should just focus on that.
Thanks for that. The only thing I would add is that those things have been being enforced on an ongoing basis. And you're right, it is an enforcement issue in a few different areas. And certainly we love our visitors and I echo some of your comments, Mason. This is not about any particular person being in the park. It's about behavior. And it's about behavior and it's about volume. The volume of people that we are getting, even with different enforcement, would still be problematic. It would be doable if we had different enforcement resources or mechanism, but the volume would still make it an ongoing issue. And if people were able to park down there, then there still would be parking inavailability for our local residents. Anyway, and again, I don't see Brent or JR's light on, and Madam CEO. I have, Mason, thank you for those comments. Tim.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. I'm viewing this as two separate issues. The first I'll speak to is the boat launch. I'm in favor of this strategy, whether there's a pandemic or not. I think we are probably one of the few places in Ontario this far south that doesn't charge for boat launches, and to me that's a mistake we've been making for quite a while. So I'm definitely in favor of charging for that. I think it's a very simple thing. You just put somebody there. I believe the charge, the money we would make on parking, or however we're going to set this up, would offset the price of that particular person. I've been down there watching the launching. We have a lovely sign that says residents only, and only launch one boat at a time. None of that is being adhered to. I tour the parking lot on a regular basis. Haven't got much to do, I guess. I can assure you that almost every vehicle in that parking lot is from somewhere else other than Orillia. I'm sure they're loving it that we would allow them this great service of all-day parking and a free, beautiful boat launch that we invested a couple $100,000 in a couple of years ago. So that particular issue I am in favor of addressing now and in the future. And don't see it necessarily as pandemic related, although I do believe that they do impact. There's a congestion there that is not good and causes some distancing problems. I'd also say that anybody who's worried about the surrounding townships should note that they've all got more waterfront than we do. And if they have a problem with boat launches or their citizens not being able to launch boats, maybe they should address their own shoreline and provide that service for their residents. So I'm not concerned about any of the surrounding townships. I agree with the mayor in that they are huge contributors, but at the same time, we are the taxpayers. So there's a bit of a difference there. So the other issue is obviously what's going on in our parks. And this to me is just a straight up health and safety issue. It's no more than that. It's got nothing to do with who they are or what they are or whatever. This is a health and safety issue. So I'm assuming that the intent of the charge for parking is to discourage use. I agree totally that the $50 is probably not that going to be that effective. If you're a van load of folk coming up from afar, split $50, and I'm not sure that's going to accomplish it, but I mean, it may be worth a try before you go to the next step. The other concern, I think, and a couple of people have mentioned this, is that, I'll ask the question, if these are actually rules or people breaking rules, or is this just something you can do and we don't cover it off in our bylaws. But if I'm a citizen of Orillia and I want to walk to the park or would drive to the park and go for a swim, I want to be safe. And so when I get to that beach, I want some sort of distancing going on, so that I can, with either alone or with my family, have a swim and leave. I noticed this past weekend and have in the past that people are setting up tents. I don't know what they use them for. I have no idea. I've never been inside them. All I do know is that it's a monopoly of a rather large space, and our beaches are not that big. So I would be wondering, should we be addressing that? Should there be a simple policy that you are not allowed to camp on the beach, set up permanently? I know people arrive early, set up a tent, and that basically claims their spot for the day. And I don't think that should happen. So I wonder if we do have the policies to cover such things. Again, going back to the issue of enforcement, are we able to enforce that? Can we ask our lifeguards to tell people, no, you can't do that? Or do we need a bylaw officer or a police officer to do that, and that kind of thing? But anyway, I'm interested in the discussion. I do believe that $50 is a non-issue and that we might have to look at maybe even increasing that. But I would also like an answer to the question about what kind of policies we can put in place as to the beach use that's going to make it safe for everyone.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate the comments and the question in the end. I am going to go to Ray in a moment, assuming that he's just more than a red microphone. We, as you know, a couple of days ago, the lifeguards started at the beach, and they are certainly, I got around and spoke to quite a number of them yesterday and just thanked them for being there. But they're also contributing to the education piece and reminding people that they must physically distance. And I'll let Ray speak to the pylon system they put in place. One thing that Innisfil has done, because I believe they started off charging for parking, that didn't work. So then they started off then they subsequently, I believe, went to saying that you could only go in that area, which is basically our option one if you are a resident and with your vehicles, and still found issues. So what they started doing subsequently, and this is something that EMC could probably evolve this, whatever resolution we come out with today, we could evolve if necessary, is they said they started banning anybody from being on the beach other than to go into the water or out of the water. And then they drew circles in the park on the grass where you could occupy, and that was it. So no tents on the beach, no people on the beach. But I'm not sure if we're there yet. But Ray, if you'd like to jump in, and even if you wouldn't, I would insist that you do as chair. I say that. Okay.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. Yes, Chapter 785 does indicate that the erection of tents is not allowed in the parks or on the beaches without the delegated authority from the director. It's something that we look at more from a perspective in the past of erecting a domicile is really what we were trying to prevent there. With the issues around sun exposure, we do allow things like small sun shelters and stuff like that, and we really haven't pressed that issue with the way it's written in the Chapter 785. But it's certainly something we could look to enforce stricter moving forward. As you mentioned there, the lifeguards have come up with a system where they use pylons spread out along the beach area to identify areas for groups to congregate. And all indications are that worked quite well yesterday in keeping people distanced.
Yeah, the feedback I was getting from the lifeguards and from some residents of Orillia that kind of stopped me as I was going through the park was that the pylon idea was a very good one. So I'll commend you and your staff for that. I believe I have Patricia. Yeah, Pat, we can't hear you for some reason. I can try to translate if you wish, but nope, cannot hear you now either. But you were speaking earlier. If it's okay, I'll have Marcia connect with you. And Marcia, you are forbidden from leaving this meeting until it's over. It seems as though we need you on a regular basis. And thank you for being here. And I'll let you connect with Councillor Heen. In the meantime, I will go to Rob and then Ted.
Thank you very much, Mayor Clark. I'd just like to talk a little bit about Canada Day. So I was out quite a few times. So yesterday around 12 o'clock, I was out touring around, and there seemed to be quite a bit of law and order in the city, down at Couchiching Beach and at Tidal Park. 3 o'clock, I was out again, was a different story. The parking lots were completely jammed. The beaches were completely jammed with tents, as Councillor Sapola had seen. There was tents everywhere, and whether we need to start enforcing that bylaw, I think it might be a good thing. Maybe just allow small umbrellas or some kind of shade shelter. And then I went around again around 7:30 and through Tidal Park and through Couchiching Beach Park. And our staff, I saw one of our staff out with a gator doing the garbage pickup, and every can had about 4 or 5 extra bags of garbage around the cans. So that's more staff time, more money, more hours that it takes to clean up our park. I think we're moving in the right direction as we're trying to protect our residents of Orillia to use our facilities, our parks, our beaches, our boat launches, moving forward to say that this is your Orillia. This is what you pay taxes for. And allowing residents to come here and use their facilities is what they want. You know, they're getting deterred if they're going down at certain times of the day and there's nowhere to park. They go home and they're frustrated. And then the email starts, social media starts, and it's hard for everybody. With the boat launch, I think we are in a time where we do need to start charging some type of fee for using it. Lake Dalrymple, for example, charges $8 to launch your boat, no matter where you're from. I think with the resident parking stickers moving forward, how many tags will each resident get will be how many cars you have. And will this be a permanent solution moving forward that like Oro Medante and Severn have, where you do have a permanent parking tag in your vehicle to say you are an Orillia resident? The stickers are a good thing moving forward, because if you were to order permanent parking tags, are probably 6 weeks away to get those from a printer or however we get them. My next question is about the trailer parking. That won't change. I'm assuming that Centennial Drive will still be on the top end by the rail beds, will still be for our boat trailers as well. And the other question was, will it be any type of conflict with, there has been some motions with the Chamber of Commerce to say that they will have the Orillia Power and Sail Squadron down there assisting with the boat launch as well. Would that be any kind of conflict to say they could be there as well, with our staff being there at 7 a.m. to 7 p.m.? And will that be okay? I know the director of the Chamber has suggested that that is an option moving forward, that they could help out. And I think the more volunteers, the better. With social distancing will certainly help. And hopefully we can go down that path. My other question is, the Chamber of Commerce had also brought forward in some of our updates from the mayor that they were looking at charging or having 30 temporary slips available for the current season to have available for residents so they could park their vessels there on a permanent basis. I know there was a report coming forward to see what the economic benefits were, or economic non-benefits were, to see what would happen with that. But I wonder if that's something we could pursue just for this season during COVID, if we do have residents that want to park their boat there a little bit longer than having not to go back and forth. I'm in favor of option 1 right now. Like, if we do want to put some type of fees for the parking as an amendment, I think we can do that, and fees for the boat launch as well can be something we can brought forward as well for non-residents. All right, thank you.
Thanks. You've presented quite a few comments and questions. So number one on the permit turnaround, I believe it's a little quicker than you indicated. It's a matter of a couple of days, I believe. But I'll ask our CAO to answer that question, and I'll get into the other ones.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we've already done some preliminary designs as to what a resident permit actually could look like. And the turnaround time essentially is less than 5 days in order to get those printed. So we have done some preliminary research on that.
His second question, I believe, was around would really residents be able to park their truck and trailer down at the port? Would you be able to comment on that as well?
For you, Mr. Mayor, yes, the residents would be able to park their truck and trailer as they would if they were currently launching their boat.
Thank you. As far as Power Squadron goes, yeah, the chamber, when we first opened the boat launch, the Power Squadron was wonderful in that they worked with the chamber and volunteered their time to come down just to help facilitate launching and some of the safety measures. I know Alan LaFontaine, the director of the chamber, has indicated that there might be an opportunity to use them further. So I think we'd be glad to have those discussions. And the seasonal slips, I'm not sure how COVID related that is, or it is to this particular report. But Ray, maybe you are able to comment on where that process is now, and if there is a desire to have seasonal slips looked at, how that would occur.
Yes, through you, Mayor Clark. It is something that the chamber discussed with us, and we did take to the EMC. It was felt that it might be precedent setting, and it is something that is being looked at as part of the waterfront study. So at this time, we weren't recommending it, and I think the EMC supported that.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Ray. Ted.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. Like Mason, I think it's important for us to recognize what we're trying to solve here. And I'd like to raise it even to a level a bit higher, and that is that in COVID times, our parks don't have the capacity to accept the number of persons that are trying to use it. And that what we're really trying to do is to manage the number of persons accessing our parks, particularly at the beach areas. And there's a number of strategies for doing that. One is enforcement, but the other is the strategies that are inherent in this report, which is to put economic obstacles in the way of people coming to Orillia and using the parks, and I'm in favor of that. I do have a couple of comments, though. One is that I am more in favor of option 2 than I am option 1, because I still believe that we are welcoming an inclusive community, and giving those persons from out of town the opportunity to buy their way onto our parks and beaches is being more inclusive than excluding them totally in the context of option number 1. I do believe if we go to option number 2, that in order to manage capacity, we dedicate a parking lot in the area of Couchiching Beach and a parking lot in the area of Toto Park that is for the use of non-residents. And when those parking lots are full, we turn away individuals from out of the city just saying, I'm sorry, our capacity is being reached. With respect to the townships, folks, their strategy is to allow those individuals in the townships to become residents of Orillia through a fee. So if we were to charge non-residents $150 when they show up at the kiosk to get a residence fee, where I show up, I just show my driver's license or my tax bill and I can get it. They pay $150 and they have the status of resident because they're in the immediate area. So I'm comfortable with that. I do believe that we need to manage the boat launch in the same way we manage parking down there, and I'm quite comfortable with a charge for that. I'm also recognize that unless you have people who are dedicated to that, even though volunteers are wonderful, volunteers tend to slip away when when they get tired and don't feel like doing volunteering anymore. What we need are people who are dedicated, and we need them on spot. Sending someone to the down to the port building to buy a pass, they'll have the boats launched and they'll be out of there before anybody finds them. So I believe we should do that. I do have two questions. One is there is a very large business community in the area, surrounding area, which is the sale of new and used boats. Many of those dryland boat sales operations or dryland marinas are using our port facility to launch boats for both demonstration and sales purposes. And I would not want to cut off the opportunity for our local business people to continue to have access to that thing. So I'm just wondering if there is a commercial boat pass or fee that could be charged. I have no problem in charging them for that service, but I do believe that their access should be more than just on Monday, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays, on the basis that I think many of their sales are done on the weekends when the people are visiting our community. And the second thing is, and nowhere in our discussions have we talked about canoes, kayaks, paddleboards, and facilitating Orillians to come to our port area and use our port, use our the calm waters within our breakwater for that purpose. And I assume that that's not equivalent to a boat launch, that we're not going to be charging visitors nor Orillians, Orillians who wouldn't be charging. My final comment, Clark, is that all of this will only work if in the near term we enforce. We do have to make sure that people get the message that we're serious about this. And I appreciate that the report requests an additional Milo for this purpose. But in your comments during our last discussion on the downtown, our concerns about enforcement, and reminders in the downtown and someone to do that, this particular situation, I believe that, and your comments about the degree to which our current Milo workforce has been stretched and have performed outstandingly, but are recognizing that there's only so long that you can keep that level of activity going. I'm wondering if this isn't the time that we hire, say, 4 or 5 students from Lakehead or Georgian in the whatever the law enforcement area over there, and bringing them online for the summer to augment and support the work of our Milos. If we are to be serious about what we believe to be true, it's not good enough just to pass regulation. We have to advertise and promote what we're doing, but we have to also demonstrate to people when they come here that we're serious about it. And seriousness in this case is only, unfortunately, is only demonstrated by reminding people directly to move on, or to indicate that the consequence of misbehavior, both in terms of parking or boat launching, or in terms of social separation or other activities in the park, are going to result in an economic sanction.
You, like Councillor Klustra, you've presented a number of items, and I appreciate that. The only, and we'll get into each one of those, just one thing I'd like to remind members of council of is that if this is going to be put in place in a short order, which I know staff are, if with council's passing of a resolution, whether it's option 1 or 2, whatever it happens to be, They'd like to have it in play for the following weekend. It will not be in place for this weekend, I think, for obvious reasons. But having said that, it's the logistics of it need to be effective, to be sure, but also to be kept as streamlined as possible. So I just would ask members of council, it has nothing to do with your comments, Ted, it's just an overall picture. Just to, whatever we do present as a scenario needs to be implementable in a short period of time, and implementable, I just made a verb. So one question raised by Ted was the possibility of marinas using the launches for the purposes that they do. Is that something that we would possibly contemplate as part of this? And I know kind of adds an extra layer of contemplation, or is that something that we would contemplate in a longer term strategy? I would ask Madam CAO to jump in there first.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if I may, just interestingly enough, I was thinking along those lines yesterday and actually went by a few of our local marinas, whether it be Crates or Bridgeport. They do have launch abilities. And so I need to better understand specifically what they would need in terms of our launch. And I suspect it's for some of those maybe larger boats, but I'm not certain. So we certainly can have some communication with the local marinas to better understand what their true need is, to determine whether in fact they could manage their requirements during the timeframes in which the launch actually wasn't being managed. Certainly we could undertake to have that discussion with the local marinas in fairly short order to better understand. But certainly something that could be considered and contemplated in a longer term strategy.
Seeing that I had Pat, Tim, and Ralph that wanted to speak to that specific issue. If that is the case, I will go Pat, Tim, and Ralph on that specific issue only, because then we're going to go back and address the other comments that Ted brought up. Pat?
No, it wasn't that specific issue. I was just saying that my mic is now working.
Thank you. That's good to know. Thank you. Thanks, Pat.
And I'll speak when I can.
Okay, good. I'll put you in queue. Thank you. Tim?
Thanks, Mayor Clark. I'm not sure what marinas we're talking about here. If we're talking about marinas that are in the outlying townships, I'm not sure what our responsibility is there. But I think the bigger point is this pretty well the same one you made, that this is a short-term fix. This is going to happen quickly. I don't think we need to get into sorting out every possible scenario that may come along or every idiosyncrasy. I think what we need to do is just have a blanket charge. Let's get through the next 6 to 8 weeks, and then over the winter we can refine some of these things if they do materialize. And just to that point, it's a little bit off to this side, but the report mentions this, I believe, that this is a great opportunity to find out exactly who is using the boat launch. And if they're looking for some sort of agreement through the report that we do maintain some stats that we can feed into some equations later in the winter when we're trying to solve this problem on a long-term basis, then I would support that.
Thank you very much. Ralph, on that particular issue.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have two boat launches, one in downtown Orillia and one on Atherley Road. The commercial boat launchers that Ted's talking about could easily use the one on Atherley Road if it need be. But I agree with Tim. I think this is something that we do now and then look at it in the wintertime. And I found that there were people, marinas coming from Midland and all those areas, Penetang, to launch their boat in Orillia because their client had a cottage and they were launching their boat here. So I think the boat launch is a no-brainer. The $50 is a no-brainer. But I agree with Tim. Let's look at it again in the wintertime.
I have heard from the chamber that there are marinas that use the boat launch for certain purposes, and there may be a benefit to the city that I'm somewhat unaware of, and I'm willing to contemplate that. I'm certainly more willing to do that as an extended strategy as opposed to this year. But Ted, on that, you want to hop back in? All yours.
Yes, Mayor Clark, only to say that marinas and boat sales operations were one of the sectors that the ERTF approached early on in our approaching the 15 different business sectors in Orillia. And remember, we're always talking about Orillia and area when we're talking about business activity. We're not exclusively talking about just the businesses that are located in our city, because the area is really the economic area. And there was no question that there certainly are on-water marinas that have boat launch facilities that are not there, but it's more the dry land marinas, and they split between those dry land marinas who store boats over the winter and need access to the lake in the spring to launch boats for residents, and in the fall to take them out and store them again, which is a different issue than those that are in the business of selling boats, new and used throughout the summer. And that is a viable economic part of our community. And so that's purely and exclusively the point I was making, is that let's not have an unintended consequence of cutting off a business area within our community just because we are doing something. And if we can spot it beforehand and there's a simple solution to it, then I don't find it a challenge.
Thanks for that, Ted, and certainly the RTF has given you a perspective that maybe all of us may not fully understand, so I appreciate that. Sir Robert of Clustra. Oh, sorry, I got Pat then Rob. Pat then Rob.
Thank you. I'm going way back to the beginning. I was remarking that Tim had said that he'd been through the park many times over the past little while, and so have I. So I'm surprised I didn't bump into Tim. And actually, I haven't cruised the park so much since I was a teenager, and when I used to cruise it a lot. I believe that we have to be really careful on the message that we give out, because we're doing this because of COVID. We're not trying to scare people away from coming to our park. We want people to be here, but just not now. So I think it was Ted's idea of having the one parking lot that we could have for people that were from out of town. But we need to get that message out and that signage out as quickly as we can, because if we want to be able to put it in place a week from now, we don't want people arriving up next weekend and saying, I can't come in. So perhaps if there's any way that we can get the signage in place for this weekend, just the signage, that would be extremely helpful, because otherwise people are going to arrive up here next weekend and say, what do you mean I can't come in? And that wouldn't be a message that we want to send out. I think that if Steve did a really good video a while ago saying, about welcome to our town, but just not now. Maybe that's what we need to look at. I liked Ted's idea about option 2 for the boat launch, but the rest of it being option 1. When I too checked out all the boat launches, I could hardly find one that seemed to be from Orillia. So I think that charging them, because the people in the boat launches, I don't think they're coming into Orillia. I think they're launching their boat, going out in the lake, having that free launch, taking their boat out and leaving. So I think that if we charge them, that's extremely appropriate.
Thanks for that. And I see JR's joined us, but I've also I'll come back to Sorry, I neglected to go to a couple of Ted's questions or points. One was on the designation of potential designation of parking lots. Another one was on, and I missed it, Ted, completely. You were wondering if you assumed there was, but you were wondering if there would be a restriction on being able to launch, I think something like a kayak. I'm not sure what you were referring there. I just want to make sure I capture that right.
Mayor Clark, it was simply to reassure our citizens and any visitors that paddleboards, kayaks, canoes are welcome in our port and in our area and are not covered by the boat launch costs. Obviously, out-of-towners will be covered by the parking charge. And have we, in fact, opened up the new pier, and does it accommodate ease of access to the water for those kinds of watercraft?
Great, thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that. So before I go any further, and just Madam CAO, if you want to, well, there was a suggestion of the parking lot, so I think I'll leave that for now. And if it's deemed and somebody wants to move that ahead, I'm not sure how complicated or not that is. I think that would be an interesting scenario. And then we'll deal with it then. But also on the Milos, do you want to? Did you have a comment on the suggestion of going beyond the hiring of just one? And then JR, I'll go to your comment.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, certainly I'd like to start, and then I know that Mr. Crawford is also available and can further elaborate on what I've missed. And so as members of council are aware, we have 4 full-time municipal law enforcement officers, and throughout this process, they've been required to enforce provincial legislation, the order, and of course our emergency measures bylaw. And certainly we do and have included in our 2020 budget the ability to hire a part-time officer. So we will be moving forward in that regard. But if we are going to implement a strategy that similar to option 1 or option 2, we would look to bring on board another municipal law enforcement officer, or if there was an ability to redeploy an existing city staff member, that might be an option or opportunity as well. The only caution that I have is it's a process to hire staff, as I'm sure everyone is aware. And so that process is an advertisement, is an interview process, is a training process, etc. So we would just have to be very conscientious of the time frame that would be required if we were to look at hiring a number of additional municipal law enforcement officers. The mayor, Mr. Crawford, and myself had a meeting with Inspector Robitaille early, today's Thursday, actually it was on Monday, and we had a very good conversation just in terms of the OPP, making sure that they're available for assistance to the municipal law enforcement officers. But as I'm sure, again, everyone can appreciate, the OPP are dealing with, a variety of enforcement responsibilities as well. So if I can maybe just through you, Mr. Mayor, ask Mr. Crawford to add any further comments with respect to increasing the enforcement team.
Sean, would you like to?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, in terms of enforcement, so just to echo what Madam CAO said, we already have 1 part-time officer in the works to be hired. And so if this proposal goes through, what we'd be doing is hiring an additional part-time officer. So we'd have the 2 part-time officers plus our existing full-time 4 officers to assist with enforcement. At this time, I believe that would be adequate. I think the other thing that needs to be emphasized here is that, our philosophy with enforcement, as council is well aware, is really to educate and see compliance. We're sort of past that phase now, and now we've sort of transferred into what I'm going to say is a zero tolerance approach. So going forward, if we're seeing groups of more than 10 congregating in our parks, what's going to end up happening is those particular folks are going to be charged. We're at that point now. And so this is just an opportunity to make the public and the council aware that that's where we're at. So for example, this coming weekend, if there's groups of more than 10 coming, then they're going to be dealt with accordingly. And the fine for that is there's a $750 set fine for violating that provincial order. Those are my comments.
Thanks very much for that, Sean. I appreciate that. And JR, I know you snuck offline here, but I think you wanted to hop in.
There, through you, Mr. Chair, just in response to Councillor Haynes' question in regards to the need for signage, certainly communications and marketing is going to be a huge part of any direction that we go with this. We do have different audiences that we do have to reach for this, being both residents, visitors, and I believe to Councillor Lauer's point, it's difficult to know exactly where the visitors are coming from. So we are working on a robust, multifaceted communications plan, but in order to get signage up in time for this weekend, may be a challenge, but we are working hard once this meeting's over to put a robust communications plan in place.
And I will say, just so for the knowledge, I'm sure if people have been reading the reports, I'm sure that you have, that you get on a nightly basis just how significant the communications aspect is to everything we've done for COVID. And Jennifer and her team have really just been great with not just with the turnaround time, but the creativity. And I think there's some exciting things coming forward from the RTF and the communication team as well. But yeah, because they have to be nimble because the messaging sometimes changes on a daily basis or a bi-daily basis, and they've had to respond accordingly. So again, thank you for that. Pat, as a follow-up, then I'm going to go to Jay. Sorry, so go ahead as a follow-up, Pat.
Hi. Yep. And in that regard, have we decided how far we're going to have the streets that are resident parking, like as far as Lackley Street, as far as West Street, because that will impact where people can park as well. Has that been decided?
I believe the report covered off some of those things, and
it didn't say, it just said nearby.
Yeah, so I know it's so some of the street, just saying this, Pat, for the broader audience, restricting online or on-street parking to residents only. But Madam CAO, if you'd like to hop in there.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Sean and his team have gone out actually to evaluate the various areas that they believe will be covered as part of a non-sort of resident area. I can't, if maybe Sean is there, Sean, if you can hop on and specifically identify, but they have gone out to have a look to see to what degree some of those side streets would need to have restrictions put in place because of the concern that people would gravitate towards those areas. So Sean, if you could speak a little bit further to that.
Sean, you want to weigh in? And then Rob, I don't think it went to you necessarily, but Rob, then Jay. So go ahead, Sean.
Sorry about that. Having some technical difficulties there. Yeah, so the municipal law enforcement officers and I went out and took a look, and I don't have the map in front of me, but we were envisioning that we could see vehicles parking as far as along Elgin, Parkview, on the other side of Cooch, over on Scott Street. So we just kind of looked at where we envisioned we would see vehicles parking if there were restrictions in the park itself. So I could send a map forward, which sort of identified those areas if council would like, but we just kind of looked at the areas and where we thought would be reasonable in terms of how far people would be willing to walk in order to get to the parks.
I can tell you that when they have the fireworks, that people will park anywhere up to Lackley Street and beyond. But so anything sort of to Lackley Street would be appropriate to close off for residents only.
Thank you very much for that, Rob.
Thank you to you, Mayor Clark. Just to speak on Councillor Eamon's comment regarding the dryland marinas, where they're doing water testing or whatever during the week. It's maybe not always on the weekends, but there would be an opportunity for a commercial operator to have a commercial operator tag on their vehicle to say this is who we are, and maybe restrict it to maybe 5 tags for commercial operators, to like 5 businesses, that this is your opportunity if you're going to be doing this type of activity for water testing or for selling a boat if they not have a boat launch at their facility.
Yeah, I've just had a little sidebar with Madam CAO. She's willing to I think, as she indicated earlier, go away and have that conversation around that particular issue. Thank you for that, Jay. And then I'm going to begin to wind this down, if you don't mind.
Thanks, Steve. Just a couple comments I wanted to make. First, I did want to stress, because we're talking about this, and I know it was brought up previously by Mason and some others, that definitely, I think all of us understand that we're an inclusive community and that we don't want to vilify those outside of the community coming in. That said, I think there is a lot of need for some action to be taken around the waterfront areas, because there has been a lot of overcrowding. I did really want to credit councillors, the rest of council, because when this issue first came up and Steve had asked me about it, I hadn't really assumed that it was as prominent as an issue. But soon after that, I came to realize that, yeah, we're having a lot of problems down there. I think just hearing kind of the discussion so far, I really did like Ted's proposal there of doing, kind of in some ways an option 1, but with a modified version where you include a parking lot for out-of-town visitors that's smaller, and then when that reaches capacity, then you don't let any more in. And that kind of accommodates, those coming in from close by out of town, and but at the same time doesn't necessarily really put Orillia in a spot where we're kind of a destination location. The other thing I just wanted to mention as well, hearing kind of about the boat launch, I think kind of a blanket charge, as Tim had been mentioning, I think that's something that seems reasonable to me. The one thing I did want to mention too was just I think if we keep, I think we need to work on developing a solution right now, because we obviously see a problem. If this problem persists and we've already kind of come up with a solution, I think it's something that, we need to start looking at further. So if that means limiting the numbers at beaches or even closing the beach, I think that's something that we have to consider if we continue to see the problems that we're having. The last thing I just wanted to say was to Ted's point there, happy to move that forward, Ted, to second it if you're going to put it forward. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Mason, I have you in queue. Thanks for that, Jay. I think staff are going to contemplate the issue around dryland marinas as part of the strategy. The issue around the designated parking lots. I think before it sounds like there's a mover and a seconder for that. So, and Ted wants to speak on that. So Ted, why don't you speak, and then if I need to refer to Madam CAO or Ray on this, I will, or Sean rather. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. I'm referencing item 3 in option 2. Non-residents will be required to pay $50 at the entrance of each lot and be provided with a ticket as a receipt of payment. We've got, there's Tuttle Park, I assume, is just one entrance, but we have at least 3 parking lots on the waterfront, maybe 4 if you do Veterans Park. My idea of dedicating one of those for non-residents requires only one one parking lot to be managed from the point of view of entrance and exit, which would reduce by a factor of a significant factor the number of staff that would be required to, at least I assume it would, And then the management of parking elsewhere is by exception through the fact that bylaw would be circulating, and if non-residents are using resident or street parking where they should not be, then they would be tagged and reminded through that mechanism. So I would be, if I were moving, if option 2 were to move forward, I'd be amending that element, or at least proposing an amendment of that element to make it a single parking lot at the waterfront, downtown waterfront, and a single parking lot out at Tuttle Park, where I think there's 3 parking areas at Tuttle Park, or distinguished areas. One of them could be dedicated for that purpose. And when it's full, it's full. But if I might just, Mayor Clark, the issue with Tuttle Park, I think, is going to be significant because, as we all know, on Mariposa weekends, parking extends across Memorial into that private yard. I don't know who owns that, but it's always full. And along the bypass, back almost as far as Forest when Mariposa is in place. Certainly across the street at the boat launch there. So I have no doubt that if we start creating a block to enter the park, that people will just park over there and walk across Memorial to access the park. And whether we have enforcement rights on those other thoroughfares, I don't know.
Okay, thank you for that. Before I go to Mason, I'm just going to ask our CAO and perhaps, thank you, Sean, if he wishes to hop in on the parking, the potential of designating a lot as a modified version of option 2 for a $50 fee for non-residents. And secondly, the issue of potential, the unforeseen, hopefully anticipated consequence of people having the ability to park elsewhere and maybe skirting some of the measures we're putting in place, and specifically with respect to Atherley Road and maybe the MTO. Madam CAO, if you would.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll maybe just as I start to talk, ask Mr. Merkley and Mr. Crawford to pop up in the screen as well, because I'm sure they may have a few comments. To Councillor Eamon's suggestions, certainly when we look at the Couchiching Beach Park area, including Centennial Park and Veterans Park and so on, we could look to designating, 1 or 2 lots as non-resident lots. I believe fairly easily. Perhaps we even look at our temporary lots, lot number 8 and lot number 12 as being the designated non-resident lots, and they're still in very close proximity to the beach area and so on. So we could look at doing that. To the mayor's point earlier, what we're trying to do, and again, sort of fairly short order, is try and keep it as simple as possible, especially when we look at bringing staff on board to sort of oversee the program. Tuttle Park is a little bit more challenging, I think, and to your point, in the sense that, there's sort of that one entrance and so on. So you're quite correct. There are 3 lots within Tuttle Park. There's the actual Tuttle Park parking lot, Barnfield, and the Jerry Udell. So I would probably maybe look to either Mr. Merkley or Mr. Crawford to bring some comments forward in terms of the ease of enabling or designating one of those lots as a non-resident lot. But maybe before I go to Mr. Merkley or Mr. Crawford, your comment also, because certainly top of mind as we think of Mariposa, and as much as we'll miss Mariposa this year, as we observed over the years, people park everywhere during that special event. And so I alluded to this earlier, those private property owners that potentially we actually do benefit when they open their lots up during a special event like that. What we would look at is the zoning of those actual lots in terms of their ability to allow people to park on those lots to visit Tuttle Park. So for example, the lot that is adjacent to the Collins Drive boat launch area, I'm sure if you go by there, you'll see there's lots of vehicles that are parked there, people fishing and so on. That is a private property, and that's actually not zoned for any sort of parking purposes. So we would certainly reach out to the property owner and have those conversations. In terms of parking along the highway, we'd also reach out to the Ministry of Transportation to see if they would enable us to put controls in place or allow us to manage that. I am fairly confident that parking along a highway is not permitted. So what we would potentially do is ask for their permission to allow us to enforce. And in a case like that, most likely it's towing of those types of vehicles. And so, you know, certainly there are some controls that we potentially can put in place for those adjacent areas. So if I can, maybe Mr. Merkley, could you speak to the issue of the ease of designating one of those spots or one of those parking lots in the Tuttle Park area?
Yes, through you, Mayor Clark. Certainly, it's possible to designate one. I would probably suggest the UDL one would be the one you would want to do. Just trying to run through the logistics, it might be a little bit more staffing required to how we control and ensure that it does, when it gets full, who goes back there, who parks there, if there's a charge, that they're charged at that area, but not at the front ones, depending on how we're working through that. But yeah, we would probably designate the UDL one.
Thanks, Ray. Yeah. The question that just came to my mind was, if we went to a designated spot for non-residents, would it be solely for non-residents, or would residents be able to backflow into there if there was a need for that? So just something that we may have to contemplate. Mason, you've been very, very, very patient.
Thank you so much, Mayor Clark. I know we've been going over a lot of info and stuff, so I'll try to keep my remarks short. The first one will be, I think we're kind of headed in the direction of option 2. I think for the most part, people have kind of went in that direction. Which variation of that, I think that's something we can definitely dive into with amendments and that sort of thing. But what I did want to point out in regards to license plates specifically, from my understanding and from other folks I've talked to, there's not really an app that you can just scan and see where license plates are from. I know a lot of people assume that they're from certain areas where you look at one and you see, oh, you know, Barrie or Toronto or Whitby or Oshawa. But I know in my family, we have, you know, 3 different of those, and, you know, none of them are from Orillia. I know other members of council that have, I know, something that says another municipality on it. So for people to, you know, drive through and look at it and say, oh, well, that says Toronto, so those people must be from Toronto, is an assumption that I just want people to kind of stay away from, because I think that can give you some misinformation and get you into some trouble. In regards to the option 2, there was one part that I forgot to touch on earlier, which was in regards to the BIA area and the limiting of parking and making that down to 2 hours a maximum as opposed to the current 5 hours. I don't think that is a good idea. You know, we talked in the earlier item about how we want to have more people supporting our downtown businesses and, you know, giving them access with, you know, opening up the roadways so that they can have more people out there. Well, I don't know if anyone's had dinner recently and actually went out someplace, but usually that takes a bit of time. And especially if you do want to do some shopping while you're down there as well, usually that's more than 2 hours. So I just want you to keep that in mind. But I think getting that option 2 on the table and then diving into those individual amendments would probably be the best way to go.
David, you've earned the right to speak.
Thank you, Mayor
By
Clark.
not speaking.
I know this has been a bit of a discussion, so I'll keep it short. Councillor Eamon brings up a very good point about Tuttle Park. And so an issue that would have to be dealt with is along Collins Drive, where Madam CAO was referring to that lot next to the boat launch, the privately owned one. They do have signs up that say no trespassing, and they have some debris and boards in the way, but people just move them and park in there. That's one issue. The other issue is along Collins Drive where there's no parking on one side, but there is parking allowed on the other side. And it's always full of trucks and trailers. So we'd need to turn our minds to a solution there in terms of, would it be resident parking only? Otherwise, I think we would end up with people, dropping off families at Tuttle Park and then going over there and parking and just walking across. So the final thing I want to say is, like all of us, I'm really, really proud of our parks. I think Ray and his staff do a phenomenal job, and we have amazing parks in this city. As taxpayers, we do pay money to maintain them. And I think the recouping of some of that cost through parking makes sense. But what we're talking about today is a short-term solution in the extraordinary circumstances that we're in. In normal circumstances, proud to show our parks to anybody and want as many people to come and enjoy them as possible. We're in the extraordinary circumstances. We need to come up with a solution as quickly as possible. And I think option 2 is the best solution at this time. And I do like some of the amendments that have been talked about. Thanks.
Thank you for that. And David, you're bang on, and I think everybody else has alluded to this in some way, shape, or form, or at some point. This is a reaction to a COVID pandemic. What we do longer term may contemplate life outside of a pandemic, but certainly this is a health and safety issue, has been well articulated. Before I go there, I just need just to maybe go to either Sean or Madam CAO with respect to, I would assume, but I would ask for your confirmation that areas like the Collins Drive, not just for the boat launches, but for parking, would be treated somewhat like some of the parking areas that Councillor Heem was speaking to, you were speaking to, Sean, in the vicinity of Cooch Park, if you would be so kind.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, that's absolutely correct. So when we did our little patrol about areas we envision parking to occur on, obviously Collins Drive was one of those areas. And so we'd envision that would be a permit parking area, temporary permit parking area, similar to those other areas we just discussed earlier.
Great. I appreciate that. And I think with that, I'm quite satisfied that not only have we had an adequate discussion, but we seem to have a bit of a direction. And I've heard enough suggestions that option 2 should be the one put on the table. I know there was the suggested amendment to have contemplate designated lots for out-of-town visitors. Still with the question to be answered, do we allow residents to park there as well? And so with that being said, Robin, I'll ask you if you'd be so kind as to put option 2 on our screens. What took you so long? There it is right there. So that further to the report, EMC 20, well, I'll just ask if there's a mover and a seconder. Hold on, consider option 2. So is there a mover and a seconder to put this on the floor? And I will ask the screen to open up for a moment. Sorry, mover or seconder, Ralph and Ted. Okay, thank you. And I will read it and then I will ask for discussion. Thank you, Megan. Moved by Ralph, seconded by Ted, to further to the report EMC 2003 dated June 30th, 2020 from the Emergency Management Committee, affectionately known as the EMC. Orillia Council support the short-term waterfront parking and boat launch strategy as set out in option 2 of the report as amended to include Monday, September 7th, 2020, Labor Day, in the prescribed timeframes. Just clarification, Madam Deputy Clerk, on as amended. Is that just about the Labor Day date at this point?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Clark. That's correct. The amended option 2 at this point is to only include that additional date, which is Labor Day.
Indeed, thank you. And we'll go to discussion to Council Ted.
Mayor Clark, thank you. If there is a seconder, I would like to move an amendment that staff contemplate dedicating parking lots for non-residents only in the Coaching Park area and in the Tuttle Park area.
Okay, I see Pat is going to be the seconder for that. You have Jay and Ralph as well. So I'll wait for that amendment to the main motion, and then I will entertain further discussion. Yeah, Ralph, I'm going to wait till I get the amendment, then I'll gladly go to you.
I'm going to take a bit.
If it's on the main motion, Ralph, you can speak now, but if it's on the amendment, I'll wait a moment.
Oh, it's on the main, on the amendment.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Mason, in queue or to speak to the main motion?
Yes, through you, Mayor Clark. It was more just to give staff heads up about a couple future amendments. I know the one I mentioned was in regards to the parking in the BIA, but we'll be bringing that up just so that I know it's kind of a scramble to get these amendments ready and that sort of thing, as well as a price change for the parking for when we get to that.
Okay. Mason, can you explain your just to give staff a heads up, your issue of the parking in the BIA was the 2-hour time limit?
Yes, through you, Mayor Clark. As I mentioned a bit earlier, it was in regards to the non-residents who are parking in the BIA, and in the option 2, it says they'll be shifting it to a 2-hour maximum as opposed to the current 5-hour maximum. Essentially, would like to have that removed for the amendment.
Okay, well, we can get into that discussion, certainly. Well, we'll go to the initial amendment with respect to the potential designation or the contemplation of designating parking lots for that the motion, sorry, this is moved by and seconded by, no, I think it's Ted and Pat. Pat, may I have clarification verbally, because I can't see you, that you are the seconder for this amendment?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Moved by Ted, seconded by Pat. The motion now before council be amended to add the following at the end of the paragraph: and staff contemplate designated parking lots for non-residents. Discussion on the amendment. Tim. Oh, sorry, Ralph first, then Tim.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. I'm not sure that's necessary. That amendment is necessary, especially in Tuttle Park. Tuttle Park, having been involved with Mariposa since it was brought back, we only have one person at the road, and they can tell them, okay, you're parking here, you're parking there, you're parking whatever. So I think the designation is not needed in Tuttle Park. As far as Coaching Park, I'm not sure that it's going to complicate things so that if a resident comes and wants to park somewhere, or a non-resident has handicap, what are you going to do with a handicap person with wheelchair and everything else? So I would just leave that alone. It just complicates and makes it really difficult for staff to do. At least that's my opinion.
Mm-hmm. The one thing I will say, Ralph, whether it goes ahead or not, anything that we do to put provisions is likely to complicate the process. I'm not saying I'm not in favor of this. I'm just saying it's anything that we add on or change will make it a more interesting process. On this particular, sorry, I got Ted on the amendment. Sorry, Tim on the amendment, and then Ted.
Thanks, Mayor Clark. The word contemplate, if somebody could explain that to me, does that mean we are asking staff to think about it, and if they think it can be done logistically, then do it. If not, then they can just go with the the route that is suggested.
Yeah, that was the wording that came from Councillor Eamon, but so that's my understanding. But Madam CAO and then Ted.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if I may, the interpretation that staff would take is that we will give consideration to looking at each of the lots to determine which in fact could be sort of designated non-resident lots. If for some reason logistically, as we sort of flesh out all the details of bringing in the staff on board and the payment system and so on, if logistically it's going to cause a significant challenge, then either way, we would actually do a CIP back to council to let council know the overall outcome of that. That's how I would interpret. So if that's not what members of council would want to see, then I would need a little bit further direction from council as to what your hope would be in terms of that particular amendment.
Okay,
thank you, Ted.
Sorry, Steve.
Sorry, go ahead, finish off, Tim, then I'll go to Ted.
I just wanted to say that I'm fine with that interpretation that gives staff the license in precedence. Well, I just wanted to make sure also that if we did designate one, we're still charging for that park. Yeah, okay, I'm good.
Great, thank you, Ted.
Mayor Clark, that was my intention, is that I don't believe that I have enough information today to firmly direct staff in this context. And so the CAO's interpretation is I'm totally comfortable with. I would, though, comment on Councillor Sepola's concern about Tuttle Park. As he may recall, in the Mariposa Festival, the Bluebell parking lot is dedicated for VIP parking, and there is a person there. In this particular case, we would buy signage and other means, like through tagging cards, direct non-residents to that lot. To be such would be my sense, at which we would have someone who would be taking the fee for daily parking at that lot if we were to use it for that purpose. So otherwise, if they parked incorrectly, they would be subject to whatever sanction. And my hope would be the sanction would be greater than $50, or they might as well just park wherever they want and hopefully get away without a ticket. But that concept is if Mariposa does it, we can do it.
Thank you, Mason. Sorry.
Just one final comment. What this is trying to do is to try and manage capacity in the park. It's really saying that we're going to use parking as the vehicle to allow as many residents as they want to go in the park, but not as many non-residents to go in the park. Because right now, as many non-residents go in the park as they want, and as many residents that try to go in the park are finding it difficult. So the real issue is how do we manage capacity in the park? And this is using parking as the vehicle for doing that, reinforced by the enforcement mechanism to ensure people follow it. So.
Indeed, we are using parking of vehicles as the vehicle. Mason and Jay.
Yes, through you, Mayor Clark, I will not be supporting this particular amendment moving forward. I do not see capacity as the big issue. I see that, as we talked about earlier, it's kind of that social distancing that's the problem. I think if people are paying, especially if we, when we get to the amount, if they're paying that $50, a day to park there, I think that's great because they're paying for that service. And I don't think that number of people should be limited in that regard, just like I don't think the number of residents. And then also, if we have, a designated parking lot, I hope that it does come into the idea that we have that overflow for residents. So if we want to fill it completely with residents, that we can do that. But also on the other hand, if we have a completely full non-residence area, and then we have our residence area that is at 50% capacity, why would we not let in more folks to enjoy our beautiful parks, especially if we are having more enforcement and we're making sure that we do bring on more bylaw enforcement and that everybody is, using the parks properly with social distancing and that sort of things. I don't think there should be limits on that as long as everybody's careful and are actually following the rules. If there's not, as Mr. Crawford mentioned, $750 fine is going to wake some of those people up.
Thanks for that, Mason. The only thing I would say from my personal perspective and my perspective on the EMC is that although you're right, it's the size of the groups gathering, it's the lack of physical distancing in some case, but there is a capacity issue, and certainly a limited Milo resource dealing with a group at a certain level or a group that has grown to this level, it becomes a harder enforcement issue. So I do believe you're right. Those are the main issues that you identified, but having a significant volume of people exacerbates the issue. Just from some of our conversations and from the reports that we see from the Milos, that seems to be the case. Jay, if you'd like to hop in.
Thanks. I know that this is kind of a question that might not have a concrete answer because we're just kind of sifting out the details right now, but this is to both the CAO and to Mr. Merkley. I was just kind of curious, if we do lay out this option as it's proposed right now, do we kind of have a rough estimate as to what the time frame would be in terms of putting it into practice? Thanks.
I believe the goal is to have it in play for a week this coming weekend. Sean and Ray, would you like to, or Madam CAO?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is the goal. We will work very hard to move forward to get the communication plan developed, to get the logistics put in place in terms of the payment systems, the staffing, and so on. So we will work very hard to try to get all of that in place starting next Thursday. And certainly staff will endeavor to keep council up to speed if in fact we're faced with a challenge in terms of the implementation.
Okay, I'll now call, Pat, quickly. This is on the amendment?
Okay, I'll wait to the full motion then.
All right, thank you. Seeing no other hands in the air, I'll now call the question on the amendment. Well, I'll just reread it. I'm not sure if I read it once. Moved by Ted, seconded by Pat, that the motion now before council be amended to adding the following at the end of the paragraph and have staff contemplate designated parking lots for non-residents. I believe I did read it. I will now call the question. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. The one. Back to the main motion. Any further discussion? I'll now, Pat, go ahead.
Speaking to the fact that we want to have it in place a week from now, how are we going to get the passes out to residents? How is that going to look?
You're gonna kiss and hug and thank your city staff. Madam CEO, do you wish to address that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't know if there'll be any hugging or kissing, but virtually, yes. Through you, Mr. Mayor, and I'm hoping that Jen will pop on because she certainly has been giving thought to the process. As I'm sure you can appreciate and you can see within the report, there are dollars that are being asked for in order to move this project forward. We would propose a pretty extensive communication plan that would ensure that, number one, the residents are well aware that they need to come and pick up a resident pass, because that's a really important piece. And certainly we look around the screen in front of us, and I would certainly look to our members of council to assist us in communicating that plan. And so if I can, as soon as Jen pops up, she can talk a little bit more about what the proposed communication would include. As I wait for it, we'll also include, there she is. I'll let you take it from there, Jen.
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair, for the communications plan, as I mentioned, we are targeting residents as well as out-of-town visitors. For residents, we will be looking to get the the word out fairly quickly. And as Gail mentioned, would really appreciate the help of members of council. But certainly there will be signage. We will be relying heavily on our online ability to get this message out because of the quick turnaround time. But certainly we will be using radio, online, as well as signage throughout the community. We have had a fairly effective sign task force in place. We will be looking at repurposing those signs to get this word out there as well. But in terms of actually getting the permits into the hands of residents, which I think Councillor Heen was asking about, we would be looking at various pickup points throughout the city, and we'll be communicating to residents exactly where those pickup points are and the times that they're able to do so.
Listen, I know there's a number of us on this meeting that have other meetings coming up. So I'm going to do, really, it's my goal as chair to wrap this up in the next 10 minutes. If that's doable also. Pat, quickly as a follow-up, then Rob and Jay.
So will there be staff members that will be selling or giving out these permits how will that look?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll address that. What we are looking at is the opportunity to redeploy some of our existing staff, because a significant element of this is communication to our residents, customer service, et cetera, et cetera. So where possible, we will be trying to ask for volunteers from our workforce to take on this responsibility. And where necessary, we will have to bring in some temporary short-term contract staff in order to assist in the process as well.
Great. Thank you. Robert.
Just on that, thank you, Mayor Clark, through Madam CAO. How many passes per household?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the concept would be that the parking pass will be tied to your license plate. So those families that have mom, dad, son, daughter, that all have vehicles, they would have to come in individually to get their passes. So there will be a database, and that database will very clearly indicate that parking passes have been issued for the following people. And so each of the passes will be tied to the license plate. So that will be the enforcement mechanism that will be used to ensure that that pass is tied to. So if a residence has 4 people within their property that have that are registered on the database, then they would each get a parking pass.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. And Jay, we're starting to bring us home here.
Through the chair, I just wondered, for those uncomfortable in going into a building right now, I know there's, those that are immune compromised or over a certain age. Is there some type of at the curb pickup option that we could offer? I know it's a specific or something along those lines, like a mail out type of option for those that request it.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, as indicated, we are tying the permits to the actual license plate, so we need to understand what the actual license plate will be. What we are contemplating is trying to set up a system that is like a drive-through type system so that people could come in and pick up. As I'm sure members of council can appreciate, this report was prepared in very short order. There's some logistics that need to be ironed out, and so the mechanism that we have that we actually finalize, we will ensure that that is communicated very clearly to our residents.
All right, Ralph.
Just very briefly, Mr. Mayor, how about the handicap people that have handicap stickers or handicap permits? Is there going to be an area where they can park, especially our local residents and even outside residents? Are we going to be able to assign an area for handicap?
I think it's fairly safe to assume that accessible parking will be available, but Madam CAO?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, our parking lots already have accessible designated spaces. So it would be the intent at this stage that those would continue to be accessible spaces for any person who has the necessary permit. But certainly what we will do as a staff group is we'll look at each of the lots, and if there is a requirement for a couple of other spaces to be designated, we'll certainly give that further consideration.
Okay, Mason, we're going to begin to wrap this up.
Yes. Yeah, through you, Mayor Clark. I will put out my two amendments here. And if there's not a seconder, obviously no need to get them on the floor and discuss them. The one was in regards to removing the 2-hour maximum that is in the report and just leaving it as status quo, which would be the 5-hour maximum for non-residents to park in the VIA. If there's a seconder, and keep talking. If there's not, we'll just go to the next one. That works for you.
Is there a seconder for that? Okay. Mason, I think it appears as though there isn't. And if you have a second amendment suggestion, all yours.
Yes, yeah. And the second item was in regards to the cost at the $50 and bringing that down to something a little bit lower, whether it's around the $20 mark. Again, if there's interest there, we can figure that out. If there's not, we can just go to the next thing. And, if there's not, there's no pressure on anybody, just trying to figure something out.
All right, thank you. Yes, indeed. Thanks for the suggestion. Is there a seconder to revisit the suggested $50 fee? Is that you seconding that, Jay?
No.
No? Okay, so I'll
Can I
ask
make
the
a
question
comment?
again. Is there a seconder for Mason's suggested amendment? Okay, so it appears not to be the case. Okay, Jay, unless somebody really insists on jumping in, you're going to be the final comment.
Thanks. And I know Mason's kind of going one direction with it. I'd actually be inclined to go the opposite. I'd be interested to see if anyone would want to do a $100 parking fee at the non-resident designated parking spot.
Is there a seconder to consider Jay's suggested amendment? Appears not to be the case, Jay. So with that being said, and without seeing any other hands in the air except one halfway up, Tim, did you wish to hop in there?
Sorry, no, I think I'm fine with just letting staff kind of work this out. I think this is kind of thing that if it doesn't work, I mean, this could be our first shot. Down the road, we can adjust up if we have to, or I think we're going to have to react here somewhere along the line anyway. So I'm more than happy to let staff work this one out and actually wish them luck.
Yes, indeed. I've been doing that for about a week now. Mason, I believe your hand in the air. And even
Yes,
though I said Jay was the last comment, you're
just short and sweet. I know I didn't get my amendments passed, and that is okay. But with that being said, I'm happy to support this motion moving forward. I think the majority of council supports it, and I think we're in a time where we need to be united on these issues, especially with COVID.
All right, thank you very much for that. Thanks to all of you for not just your discussion around this issue this morning. We had two fairly comprehensive issues, and actually, quite frankly, it was a very good discussion. So with that being said, I have read it, unless anybody wishes for it to be reread. Ralph, want me to reread it?
No, I just want to thank staff for their excellent work on this. I know you've done it, and all of council will appreciate it. I'm sure that the citizens of Orillia will appreciate what staff is doing here, taking their time and so on to do this. So thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Now the motion's before you. I'll now call the question. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Okay, yeah. Madam CEO and Madam Deputy Clerk just brought up a good point. The contemplation really was to do a short-term strategy until September 30th and then come back with a longer-term strategy. Are you okay if staff take that away as a direction from the motion just passed? I'm saying. What's that? Oh, sorry, we'll need another motion for that. Sorry, I do see unanimous shaking of the heads, but we'll put this motion on the screen and we'll do this quickly then.
No, it's the standalone motion.
Yeah. So it'll be a standalone motion just to come back with a longer term strategy as well. And it's coming up on the screen. Are you taking off, Tim? Sorry, so I'm looking for a mover and a seconder for staff to come back with a longer term strategy. I'll read this when I get a mover and a seconder. If you would be so kind as to remove that, Robin. Thank you. Moved by Tim, seconded by Mason. Any discussion? Oh, sorry, let me read it. Thank you. Moved by Tim, seconded by Mason, that further to report EMC 2003 dated June 30th, 2020 from the Emergency Management Committee, an evaluation of paid parking and resident and non-resident parking and boat launch access be included in the scope of the parking and traffic demand management study. Any further discussion? Tim.
Just a quick question, Mayor Clark. Do we have to give authorization to be taking some sort of data over the summers to feed into that longer term strategy? Or is that just a given?
I'm sure they'll include whatever data they discern, but Madam CAO.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I wouldn't suggest that any further direction be given by council. And what we'll do is our best to set up a mechanism to try and collect some of that data to help inform the plan moving forward, but no further direction. It would be our intent to try and do that as part of this process at any rate.
Okay. Okay, good. With that being said, and seeing no, Ralph, quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Very quickly, when the EMC is disbanded or canceled, this still applies, right?
Correct. This is a motion of council and not, I'll look for a nod of the head from our clerk's department, but this would go until September 30th, which I think is in the resolution. So yes, that is indeed the case. Great. Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. And we'll have a bylaw on the screen, that the bylaw number 2020-59, a bylaw to confirm the proceedings at this very meeting of council today, special meeting held on July 2nd, 2020, be enacted. Is there a mover and a seconder? Moved by David and seconded by Rob. Any discussion? All in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. I'll ask for one more motion. Motion to adjourn. Moved by Mason, seconded by Ted. All in favor? Enjoy this beautiful sunny weather. Stay safe.
Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you, staff. Thank you, council.